My best friend's fiancé confessed he loves me but still planned to marry her. I told her, she left him, and I'm helping her move on. My best friend and I have always been close, and I adore her. We're really open and honest with each other, about as close as two people can go without being romantically attached. We're even joking that we're wives, because we're so close. Because of her fastidious personality, we have already discussed random circumstances and how we would like the other to approach them. For example, if a guy asked one of us out, how would the other react? Or if we both developed affections for the same person. We've even discussed what would happen if one of us died. One of these situations involved the dreaded, if I had a boyfriend and he had feelings for you issue. The possibility of this happening has arisen several times over the years, with varied degrees of concern. We both thought that would be terrible, but we couldn't agree on how to deal with it. I've always claimed that I'd want to know regardless of the circumstances, but she insisted on not telling me. She has been adamant about this every time it comes up, regardless of how I phrase or change the circumstance. She made it abundantly apparent that she would never want to know. About 3 years ago, my best buddy began dating a guy. He was already a loose member of our friend group, so we both knew him. I didn't think much of him at first. He appeared cool, courteous, and respectful. He gradually grew more integrated into our group, and he got along with everyone. The guys in the group liked him, the girls were excited for my closest friend, and, most importantly, she was overjoyed. She had always wanted to be in love, and he seemed ideal for her. He treated her and everyone else with great respect. He and I got along great, but we never hung out one-on-one. Our conversations were primarily limited to small talk about music, work, and other casual topics, which occurred in group situations. He made similar efforts to connect with the other members of the group, and I always appreciated that he was interested in her life and the people she was close to. I've always been the odd one out among our group of pals. I missed a few classes in school, so the most of my pals are significantly older than me, and I've always been the baby of the group. While most of us attended to the same institution, I've never been interested in dating. Though I've had interest from men, I'm a daydreamer who is obsessed with my profession. My future goals do not include children, and may not even include marriage. The idea of love appeals to me, but I've always been content with myself and have never felt compelled to seek it out. This resulted in an ongoing joke among our friends about me dying alone, surrounded by dogs. It was innocent fun, and the guy joined in on the jokes. Over time, I observed that he was particularly concerned in my love life, urging me to follow my goals and take my time. My best friend always did the same thing, so I didn't think much of it. Until about 4 months ago, I met a man, 25 million, who utterly swept me off my feet. We'll call him Max because that is his name. It was very unexpected, he just swooped in, and we've had a lovely, fairy tale-like romance. Because of my lack of experience with relationships, I've spent a lot of time discussing my sentiments with my best buddy. She's pleased for me, offers advice, and is usually quite supportive. Her fiancé, let's call him Guy, is often present during these chats and occasionally contributes. Everything seemed wonderful and awesome until Guy started acting strangely. We'd be hanging out as a group, and I'd relate a tale about Max. Guy would suddenly act strangely, informing me that seemingly typical things Max did were red flags. For example, when Max unexpectedly came up to take me stargazing late at night, which I appreciated because I enjoy surprises and work in astronomy, Guy went on about how hazardous it was for me to go alone, blah, blah. Guy has always been polite, supportive, and considerate to others. His judgment is so respected that my best friend began to question Max's intentions solely because Guy expressed doubts. Meanwhile, all of my other pals thought Max sounded fantastic and dismissed Guy's conduct as strange. During this time, Guy told me that he planned to marry my closest friend. I was ecstatic for them and pledged to keep it a secret. He told me because he wanted advice on the ring and how my best friend wanted to be proposed to. Everything appeared fine until it wasn't. The tipping point occurred when Max met my friends for the first time. Everyone liked him, and he appeared to get along with everybody. Max and Guy were speaking off to the side when Guy abruptly dropped his drink on the table and walked out of the pub. My best friend became perplexed and pursued him, while I approached Max to find out what had happened. Max appeared shocked. He told me that Guy had been performing the big brother thing, which he had learned from a number of the guys in the group. The majority of them were joking around, but Guy was much more serious. He stormed out after Max expressed how serious he was about me. Max told him that there was no need for concern because he would never injure me. Later on, Max speculated that Guy might be envious. I was hesitant because Guy had never done or said anything to indicate that he had affections for me. He'd always treated me the same as the rest of the group, despite the fact that we spent more time together because I frequently visited him and my closest friend's house. I decided I'd had enough of the stress and messaged Guy. First, I inquired if he was okay. Then I stated I hoped things was okay amongst us all. The conversation went as follows. My response. Is everything okay? I hope we're good. The gentleman. It's not cool, I don't trust that guy. You. Do you mind if I ask why not? Specifically. No one else has bad vibes, everyone even invited him to the beach tomorrow. Guy. What are you saying? He looks at you funny. I can't explain it properly. You've known me a while. You know I have your best interests at heart, trust me on this. I understand that you can't help but get bad vibes, but no one else does. I'm sorry, but I need more than trust me to go on. While I appreciate your concern, I'm capable of making my own mistakes, and I don't think this is one. It would mean a lot to me if you could try to get along with him to make it easier for him to fit in. I plan on keeping him around for a while, and, best friend, wants to do double dates and stuff. You're going to run into him eventually. Guy replies. 1. Double dates sound lame. 2. Even if they didn't, I don't want him to come. I say. 1. Take that up with your lady. 2. Do you really not like him that much? He responded. Okay, he seems alright, but kind of weird. How can a theater kid be so alpha? It's more that, I'm jealous. My response was, I resent the notion that theater guys can't be manly. But also, the group is really tight, and everyone really likes you. You've been one of us for years now. Max got a lot of attention tonight because he's the new guy. I'm sorry if you felt excluded, but I promise it's really not like that. He didn't respond for a long, then sent this. He said, I've been thinking very carefully about how to phrase this message. I don't want you to think I don't love best friend, because I do, very much, but I'm also in love with you and have been for about 2 years. When I realized, I thought about breaking up with best friend, but you were always so in your own world. I thought I'd never have a shot anyway, especially if I was your BFF's ex. I pushed it down and lived with it. It was hard, it sucked. I got over it, Kai. I figured that if I couldn't be with you, I could at least be happy with best friend, and close to you. Then you met Max, and watching you begin to fall in love with him was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. I know this is cliché and theatrical. I know it's wrong, and I should just not say anything about him, but I genuinely feel sick when you talk about him. I can't tell you how much I wanted to strike the guy last night, and then how bad I felt about it when I learned he was actually a nice guy. I believe the only thing worse than you being with another guy is you being with another guy I like. Sorry for offloading this onto you. I know it's unfair to do this now. I do love best friend, you know I do. I want to marry her. I would rather you didn't tell her, but what happens next is up to you, I guess. You. If this is a joke, it's not funny. Can you please tell me the truth? He replied. Sorry, but that is the truth. What are you going to do? I have not responded to him. He then sent me a few more texts, asking what I was going to do. I said, I'm thinking. Small edit. Since I posted this, he has sent several more messages wondering what I was going to do. I told him I hadn't made up my mind, but I also made it apparent that I didn't reciprocate his feelings. I am devastated, and my feelings are nothing compared to how best friend would react if she knew. I want to tell her so badly. I know if I were in her situation, I would want to know. The last thing I want is to marry someone who isn't open with me about something like this. But when we joked about this situation earlier this year, she insisted she didn't want to know. I understand it is not my responsibility, but I still feel bad. I'm wondering if I did anything to provoke Guy's reaction, and if I can even continue to pretend he never said anything. His affections have never been reciprocated. Max was with me when I received the message and has been incredibly supportive, albeit a little annoyed with Guy for obvious reasons. Send help. Summary. Best friend and Guy met 3 years ago. He fit right in with our group of friends, got along with everyone, and was overall a pleasant person. Life continued on. They moved in together, and I was overjoyed for her. He is everything she has ever wanted. Then I met what seemed to be my dream boyfriend. Everyone was pleased for me, except Guy, who became quite standoffish and strange about it. I don't think much about it. Guy wants to marry my closest friend and asks me for advice. Awesome. After Max and Guy meet for the first time, things quickly escalate. Guy begins messaging me that he is in love with me but wants to marry my best friend and only be in love with me in the shadows. His sentiments for me are not returned in the slightest. I need to discuss this Reddit. Should I tell her? Should I keep this to myself? I am upset at Guy. I feel dreadful. I feel terrible for my dearest friend. I'm not sure if I can face her in the eyes while she marries this person. I'm not sure I can let her marry him without her knowing all the facts. I'm overwhelmed. Please give me some advice. Update. Sorry, this will probably grow long. It does. There were many differing ideas on what to do, and many of you had very good reasons for your suggestions. However, there appeared to be a consensus. 1. This sucks, and there is no ideal answer, and 2. Everyone seemed to agree on the letter idea, which had been presented by a couple of people. The gist was that I should write a letter, add screen caps, and then give her the information. That way, she would have some control over whether or not she wanted to know. I have to admit that telling her there was something to know felt like I was forcing her to open it. But this is what happened. I made the envelope and went to her house while Guy was working, or just to hang out. Typical things. Reddit, I'm not a bad actress, but this woman knows me very well. She answered the door for me and instantly asked what was wrong. To my everlasting shame, I burst into tears. It was quite pitiful of me and not great. Ugh. After I had collected myself, I began saying what I had been practicing in my brain. That was something we'd discussed a lot in hypothetical scenarios, and it had actually occurred. She'd always stated she didn't want to know, but I wanted to give her the option. I handed her the letter. Then, without even opening it, she started crying, which prompted me to restart. That was okay since the absurdity of us both standing in her living room crying all over each other made us giggle a little. Many others assumed she had noticed or understood Guy's feelings, and they were completely correct. But it gets crazier than that. I honestly cannot believe I'm describing this. It's simply odd. I do not know. My closest friend had assumed Guy had a harmless little crush on me, the kind that people in partnerships sometimes have. But when he didn't tell her about it, she began to feel uncomfortable. She did something she should not have. You know how it goes, she snooped. She snooped on his PC months ago and discovered a file with my initials buried among a slew of other documents. She went to get his laptop and handed it to me to read as she read my letter. Inside, he had written stories, similar to fan fiction, about the three of us living a poly-relationship lifestyle as spouses. Some of it was sexual content, which, I think I would understand more if it had only been sexual fantasies. However, there were also really long records about our lives together. It also goes deep. There was a whole storyline about him attempting to persuade me to have children. I love them, but I don't have children, and everyone knows it. There were many stories of varying lengths. I didn't read them all. Instead, I browsed them with my mouth hanging wide. It's difficult to express. It was strange to read about myself like that. There were newer docs that my closest friend hadn't read yet. She went on to say that she didn't mind because she was in all of the articles as well. That reassured her of his love for her, but having me in their lives in that way was clearly not ideal for her. She was disturbed by the way he had spoken to me in the previous day's messages and those he had sent since. I asked her many questions, including whether she felt safe. She stated she did. When I asked her what she wanted to do, she stated she wanted to leave him. She also apologized for not informing me earlier. While it bothers me that she didn't, given what transpired later, I've basically forgiven her and put any discussion about it on hold. She doesn't need it right now. I've been so glad that she wasn't upset with me for busting her bubble and was more concerned about her that it appears to be a secondary issue. This was not one of the things I expected to happen during my vacation. The subject then moved to me being concerned about her safety. While he does not appear to be dangerous, his conduct is quite compulsive, and he is clearly irritated that his fantasy is growing more and more distant from reality with Max in the picture. I'm also concerned about Max's safety. I'm not sure if I'm being rational or paranoid. She continuously assured me that she felt absolutely protected. She claims he has never done anything but this, which is a red sign, but she still wants to leave. She is naturally cautious, so she is taking extra precautions. Then she stood up and began packing her bags, giving me normal, business-like orders on what items she wanted me to gather from around the home. She filled her suitcases, and I packed a box with her personal belongings. She then wrote a note to Guy stating that she no longer thought they should be together and that she would discuss it with him via messaging or in person a few days later in a public area. She assured me of the plan. This is when I may have done something wrong, I'm not sure. I have a pen drive on my keychain. I told her I needed to grab copies of the articles because, even if she doesn't believe it would happen, we need something to prove his compulsive behavior. She consented, and I now have a pen drive filled with stories and playlists about myself. My best friend and her ex, I'm not going to lie, I've been tempted to read the stories out of morbid curiosity, but I've managed to resist so far. We went to my apartment first to decide what to do next. Her feelings were understandably mixed. I then got a call from Max and filled him in. He advised we stay with him because Guy doesn't know where he lives. However, my best friend preferred to stay in a nearby motel. We paid for it with my car, and after I hovered nervously over her as she settled in, she finally declared she wanted to be alone. That is not uncommon for her when she is upset. I've been visiting her, and she's been messaging me the entire time. So I'm very certain about where her brain is. Sad, but coping well given everything. Still, I can't help but be worried. I'll remain with Max till things settle down. Since approximately 5 p.m. That night, 2 nights ago, I received messages from Guy. They are the I just want to talk sort, not aggressive or anything. I was about to block him on everything, but my best friend persuaded me not to since she was concerned about his mental health. For the time being, I'm staying at Max's as a precaution. Guy has attempted to communicate with both me and her, but the only reaction he has received is to read the note she left him again. Finally, thank you to everyone who left a remark, especially those who wrote a lot, gave great advice, sent me good vibes, or PM'd me. You people were fantastic, and I appreciate all of your feedback. Now to the next story, Story 2. Am I the asshole for declining to celebrate Christmas with my boyfriend's family and not inviting him to my family's celebration? Original post. For context, I, 19F, am from the United States and currently a second-year university student in the UK. My boyfriend, 23M, is British, recently finished his master's, and is now working. We've been dating for 10 months, and he's my first boyfriend. He's been nothing but understanding, kind, and supportive throughout our relationship. I've met his parents and siblings twice, and both times were wonderful. His mom even told him she thinks I'm the one. In late November, he asked if I'd like to spend Christmas with his family. He said everyone would love to have me there, and I thought it was sweet, but I declined. I've been feeling homesick and wanted to spend Christmas, a holiday that means a lot to me, with my family in South Dakota. When I told him, he seemed aloof for a few days. I went to his flat later to reassure him that I'd love to visit his family another time, but for me, Christmas is a family holiday. I now realize how that would have sounded dismissive. He looked hurt and asked, "Do you still love me, and aren't I your family?" I reassured him that I do love him, and things seemed fine after that. About a week later, he surprised me by showing me a flight he'd booked to South Dakota for Christmas. Flights to South Dakota are expensive, especially internationally, and while the gesture was touching, I thought it was impulsive and unwise. I told him it wasn't a good idea. For the first time, he got really upset, accusing me of not caring about him, not being serious about us, and thinking only of myself, all of which are untrue. I love him and value our relationship deeply. Knowing he was speaking out of hurt, I asked him to take a walk to cool off. When he returned, I explained that he meant everything to me, but I wasn't ready for him to meet my family. To be honest, I'm nervous about how my family would react. I'm white, he's Arab, and my family in rural South Dakota is not exposed to diversity. They've made ignorant, racist comments in the past. While they'd likely be polite to his face, I fear they might say something offensive or jokingly inappropriate. They also assume Arab equals Muslim, even though he's Christian. This ignorance embarrasses me, and I don't want to put him in a situation where he might be hurt. I didn't tell him any of this though. Instead, I said I felt it was too soon to bring someone home, as in my family, that's often a precursor to engagement, which is true. He asked if he wasn't good enough, and I reassured him that he's perfect. He then mentioned that the tickets were non-refundable. I started crying, apologizing for wasting his money and saying how much I wanted him there, just not right now. He asked me to leave and said he needed space. I flew back home nearly a week ago, and since then, we've only had brief phone conversations. He still texts me, "I love you," and "good night," but he's clearly distant and hurt. I don't know if there's anything I can do to fix this or reassure him. So, AITA? Verdict, asshole. Editor's note, OOP received mixed reactions of YTAs and NTAs. YTA was based on the details where OOP was not clearing up regarding racism issues from her family and their background. NTA was for what OOP did as her relationship isn't even a year yet. Relevant comments. Commenter 1. YTA. Your family is pretty racist and you might as well tell him that now. Their reaction is going to be the same if you brought him there now or 5 years from now. Your intent is selfish in nature. You're not protecting him. You're protecting yourself from the criticism you're going to get. He's hurt now. Wait till he meets your parents and realizes you kept such a massive thing a secret. OOP, my immediate family, mom, dad, and sister, are very open and totally fine with me dating him. It's my extended family, grandma, aunts, uncles, and cousins I am extremely worried about. Commenter 2. No one is an asshole immo, but you've both made big errors. Buying a non-refundable international flight without telling you is very unwise, like you said. But you're not being a good partner by hiding the truth about your family from him. You're 19, so I'm not gonna say YTA, but this is an asshole move. He deserves to know your true motivations. I'm sure he would understand if you just explained it kindly. Nearly everyone has experiences with ignorant family. Did you even tell your family about where he's from though? Oop. My entire family knows his race. My immediate family, parents and sister, are in full support and it doesn't bother them at all. My extended family, grandma, aunts, uncles and cousins, have already made racist remarks about him, most of them they tried to pass off as jokes. Commenter 3. Do you push back against that? Have you made it clear to them that this is serious, and they need to cut it out? Unless you're planning to go low contact with your family and live in the UK full time, this isn't going to end well. Trying to just push the meeting off into the future. Oop. My boyfriend and I want to live together in the UK once I graduate. My family doesn't know this yet, and I think this would be another reason to get mad at him. They were already livid about me going to another country for uni. As for their racism, I have told them I didn't appreciate it, but most of the comments I have heard through my sister after they happened. Commenter 4. Bold of him to book non-refundable plane tickets without talking to you. Pretty huge red flag. TBH. You've been together 10 months, he needs to chill the fuck out. This seems controlling and clingy. When you get back you need to be honest with him that you weren't sure your family would behave, and also that you felt him buying tickets was presumptive and moving too fast. You're 19? You don't need to rush things and he needs to respect your boundaries. OP. Thank you so much. This was really helpful. Update 1. My boyfriend, 23M, and I, 19F, have been dating for 10 months now. He's from the UK where I study at university, and I am currently back in the USA for winter break. I made a horrible mistake about how I handled his invitation to Christmas and refusing to let him come to mine, in another Reddit post of mine. Yesterday, I decided to call him and try to fix things, since what I did was so wrong. I explained my family's issues with racism, he's Jordanian and I'm white, and how I was wanting to protect him and trying to handle my family's problems before he gets introduced. I acknowledged that I should have told him, and handled it poorly, but would be honest with him from now on. I also told him that I had a conversation with my family about my relationship, and told them any racist behavior from their end would be completely unacceptable. Initially, he was understanding of my situation. He said my family didn't change the way he felt or viewed me, he was glad I was honest, and he apologized for his reactions earlier. After a while, he said that after what happened, we should lay some ground rules for each person in our relationship. I thought it was going to be things like honesty, trust, consideration, etc. Instead, he literally gave me things I must do in order for this relationship to be successful. Firstly, he told me I couldn't make decisions about things without him first. He basically said that relationships require sacrifice and compromise, and with big things such as Christmas, vacations, etc., I would need him to be okay with me doing these things. He said it was childish of me to be in the habit of doing whatever I want. Secondly, he told me I should distance myself from my family. I actually understand his reasoning here, considering how some of them are racist and not great people. I told him it was complicated, because I still love them despite this, which might make me just as bad? Not sure. I could still see where he was coming from, so I told him that if they ever made a racist comment about anyone in front of me, I would try to educate, and if that didn't work, I would distance myself. He then said I was playing middleman, and that was unfair to him. He said in a few years when we get married, I would have to make the choice. He finally told me he wants my location at all times, and wants me to go low contact with my male friends, most of which are gay anyways. I told him a lot of these rules seemed over the top, and in the most patronizing tone, he said, "You've never been in a relationship before and I'm older than you, so you should listen." The moment he said that I thought it didn't sound like him at all. Most of the time he is the most easygoing and relaxed person, so I couldn't believe it. I told him I didn't appreciate being talked to like a child, and if he wanted to be someone's father, then he should look for another person. He said that while he still forgave me for what I did earlier, my behavior was a testament to how immature I am. He then said we would continue this conversation another time and hung up, before we could even say goodbye. I feel like I partially caused this shift in his behavior by inadvertently making him insecure because of my refusal to let him come. Before this, he was honestly the last person I would ever consider getting insecure. He is very good looking, has a good career, and has always been confident, so I would never think he would act this way. It breaks my heart to know that I caused his actions, and want to know how I can convince him to let go of the rules so things can go back to the way they were. Or Ada for declining to follow the rules, and should I just follow them? Edit. I've been in this relationship for 10 months and really do love him. I told my friends the things he said and they've reiterated the points made here, but I guess it's hard for me to wrap my head around how he could go from such a good guy to this. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but please be mindful that it's a lot more difficult for me to look at this objectively. Second edit. I appreciate everyone's comments and support. I have read every single comment and have thought about my relationship all afternoon. I cried when I realized I must end things. I will be texting him tomorrow morning and breaking up. Relevant comments. What is OOP's boyfriend's religion and his family's background in UK? OOP. He's not Muslim, but Christian, and his family has lived in the UK for 3 generations. Commenter 1, OP, I'm gonna be brutally honest here, even if I get downvoted to hell. Keep in mind I've read your first post. 1- He comes from a misogynistic culture, even if he's not Muslim. And it's showing. Why? He got angry cause you chose your birth family for Christmas, even though you guys haven't been together not even for 1 year. B. He inserted himself in your holidays with those tickets he bought. That was controlling and intrusive, not caring. Now, just because you didn't really told him why you didn't want him there, to not hurt him, he's taking that as a green flag to call you immature and assume an even more controlling stance. He's already used manipulation. Don't you love me? 2. There's plenty of suffering in your future if you remain with this guy. This has only just begun. Leave him and spare yourself, or regret it later. The choice is yours. Oopie. Thank you, I have really absorbed everything you said, and what others have said. And I'm going to break things off. I am not sure if I should until I am back so it's in person or if I should just do it over the phone. It feels mean to just break up over the phone, and since our relationship is long-term, shouldn't I just do it when I get back? Does OOP live with her BF? And what do her friends think of the relationship altogether? OOP. We don't live with each other, sometimes I stay over at his flat, but I live in my uni accommodation. My friends, in the UK, really like him. We've been to the pub together as a huge group and it's always been a lot of fun. He's very kind and funny, so they've never had issues with him. My friends in the US didn't mind him until this entire thing happened. Since they never met him in person, I would send photos of us and SS's of our texts, and they all would say how in love we looked. Before this, he was legitimately perfect. I met him in my university's cafe where he bought me coffee and chatted with me up. He was so charismatic and made me feel so special, always remembering little details and giving me random surprise gifts. He seriously has never been this uptight before. The only thing he did was express concern over a few of my male friends, but I assured him they were gay, or they didn't have feelings for me, and he let it go. Commenter 2. OP, this is classic controlling behavior. He is trying to isolate you from your family. I haven't read your other post yet, but it looks like they are inadvertently giving him the right tools to do so, from your friends and basically everything that would provide you a place of refuge and shelter if you ever have to leave him. This whole, I am older, so you must listen, would not fly even if he was 10 years older, but he is fucking 23. That is 4 years older than you. He still is a fucking immature child. Maybe not legally, but certainly from the way he acts. What are the rules for him? What are the sacrifices he makes? Right now all I can see is him trying to basically make all decisions for you and make him totally dependent on you, while he gives up nothing. NTA. And when you go back to the UK, politely tell him to fuck the hell off. Commenter 3. Op, you didn't cause him to be like this. It was already there and he latched onto the first mistake you made to show his true colors. He's using your guilt to manipulate you and control you and make it your fault. This was always what was going to happen. Nothing you did or didn't do was going to prevent it. You're 19, you just got done being a child who had to listen to their parents. This is the time for you to make your own decisions. Be independent and yet, do what you want, within reason OBVs. Don't stay in this relationship. It's not going to end well for you if he's already this controlling after 10 months. Update 2. Hey everyone, I wanted to update on my previous 2 posts. I received great advice from a lot of people and it immensely helped me try to evaluate our relationship. I texted my friends about the situation, and they also agreed he sounded overbearing. About an hour ago, I ended things for good. I texted him yesterday afternoon that I thought we should have a serious discussion about our relationship. He said we should wait until we have both cooled off from our conversations earlier, so I suggested tomorrow. He sent me his usual good night and I love you texts, which kinda broke me. His horrible behavior didn't erase 10 months of love that I feel for him, and it almost felt like betraying him saying the same things back when I knew what I was going to do in the morning. Here's kinda a summarized version of the call. It was over an hour, so I condensed it as much as I could and I tried to write it as quickly as the call ended so I wouldn't forget. Anyways, when I called him, he seemed very normal and calm. We talked for 10 minutes just about how things were going and stuff. Then I basically told him that I didn't want to do this, but I thought it would be best if we broke up. I said that we probably expected different things from our partners, and I couldn't do what he wanted from me. After I said that, he sat in silence for like a minute. I thought the call had dropped, but then he said he was processing what I said. He asked me if this was revenge for what he said 2 days ago, and I said no, just a realization of incompatibility. He then said he wasn't going to change his mind on his boundaries, and me giving him an ultimatum was manipulative. I told him that this wasn't an ultimatum, it was going to happen. He then kept repeating, "What the fuck, my name?" and then told me I didn't mean it. He asked me if I loved him still, and I said yes, and then he said he knows I'll come back. I said this was it. He said something about how we need each other and went on a rant, but I don't remember that much of it because I was crying at that point. I cut him off at the end, and just said goodbye. He said he would never forgive me and I would never see him again since he was that awful, and then hung up. I immediately blocked his number, WhatsApp, Snapchat and Insta. I do not think he will have another way of contacting me. I do not think he will seek me out or anything, so I'm not too worried about that. My university accommodation also has front desk security and you can't get in without a keycard. Thanks again everyone. Edit. His mom just texted me saying she was sad things ended the way they did, but she wishes me all the best. Minor update. One of his friends tried adding me on Snapchat for some reason. Don't know if it's him using his friend's account, his friend wants to know what happened, or a coincidence he added me right when this unfolded. Relevant comments. Commenter 1, NTA, you did the right thing. When you get back, make sure to inform campus accommodations that this person is not allowed to contact you or visit you or anything. He also might try to see you in the buildings where you have your lectures, if those are accessible, or places where you shop or like to eat. For the next few weeks, see if you can mostly socialize in groups and with friends, avoid being alone. Oop. Thank you. Most of the buildings require an ID to get into. Commenter 2. NTA. Please be careful when you return to the UK. Get help to watch your back. He is not done and he does not accept this is over. He sees you as the dumb, immature, inexperienced girl he can mold and control the way he wants. No way will he give this up easily without fighting. Oop, thanks for your advice. I have talked to a lot of my friends in the UK and I am going to stay close to them for a while when I get back. Commenter 3. NTA. Setting boundaries and then actually enforcing them is an important life skill. Now to the next story, story 3. My mom let her friend and his kids stay, giving them my room without asking. Am I the asshole for refusing to pay the bills at home and moving in with a friend? My mother and I share a modest but comfortable home. Since she and her husband split up a few years ago, it's just the two of us. To be honest, she suffered as a result of the nasty separation. Seeing her so broken at the moment was difficult, but she eventually started to get better. Even though it was difficult, I always stood by her side as she worked to improve her life. She deserves to be happy, after all. My mother informed me a few months ago that she had made a new friend, who we'll call Jake. It looked so innocent at first. She informed me that they began spending time together after meeting through common friends. It seemed pleasant to me. I was happy that my mom had someone to chat to and enjoy because she had gone through a lot. You know, she seemed lighter. As though she didn't have the same emotional weight as before. Jake seemed like a decent friend to me. I didn't want to pry, so I didn't ask a lot of questions. But as time went on, I saw that they were spending more and more time together. They spent time together, went out to dinner, and he even dropped by a couple of times when I wasn't home. Once more, I didn't give it much thought. I desired for my mother to live her life apart from the house and me. She is free to enjoy herself and go on. I didn't think twice when she told me one day that Jake needed a temporary somewhere to stay since his upstairs neighbors had flooded his flat. Why don't you let him stay? I said. Let's assist him. It seemed like a good idea. Then everything began. I thought Jake would arrive with just one guy and maybe a few suitcases, but he didn't show up. He and his 2 kids showed up at our door. 2 teenagers, ages 13 and 15, a girl and a boy. My mother never mentioned that he would have kids, much less that they would move in with us. Like a deer in headlights, I stood there staring at them. When Jake presented his children, they appeared to be kind enough, but my only thought was, where in hell are they going to sleep? We don't have a large house. The apartment has 2 bedrooms and a tiny kitchen and living area. That's all, My mother and I each have our own room. No guest room is available for use right now. I assumed my mom would have a plan. Perhaps Jake and his children would spend the night in the living room on couches or air mattresses. Naturally, it would be tight, but manageable for a little period of time. However, after showing them around the house, my mother said something that startled me. As if it were no great issue, she pointed to my room and stated, "You'll all be sleeping in her room." "Wait, what?" I said in awe. "My chamber? Every one of them? My privacy? My space? My bed?" I was totally taken aback. She didn't ask me at all. She didn't discuss it with me in advance. She failed to warn me. Nothing. She made the independent decision that I would let these strangers stay in my room. As Jake and his children thanked her and nodded as if everything were usual, I stood there in quiet, trying to take in what had just happened. I was screaming within at the same time. I was finally able to speak to my mother when they went to bring their baggage inside. "What do you mean they're sleeping in my room?" I asked her. "Where do I go?" She pretended it didn't matter. "It won't last long," she said. "You can sleep on the couch," as though it were the best course of action. I was enraged. She made this decision without even consulting me, and I told her that was unfair. "This is my home, and I'm just trying to help a friend in need," she stated dismissively. "When you're older, you'll comprehend." "When I'm older, will you comprehend? I'm not a kid." This was extremely unjust, and I'm old enough to recognize when I'm being treated unfairly. She was asking me to give up my place, my refuge, for an indeterminate amount of time, not just a minor sacrifice. She didn't even have the decency to discuss it with me beforehand. I was too ashamed to even look at Jake and his children when they returned. Even though they had done nothing wrong, I couldn't help but feel bitter. My room, my bed, my closet, everything was going to be taken over by them. As they settled, I tried to avoid them for the remainder of the day. While I sat on the couch, angry, my mom assisted them in moving their belongings into my room. That night, I slept on the couch, and it was awful. There wasn't enough space to spread out, and the cushions were rough. I barely slept at all and woke up with a tight neck. Although Jake's children are adorable, they still occupy a lot of room and are teenagers. They constantly use the restroom when I need it, are noisy, and leave their belongings all over the place. I feel as like I'm a visitor in my own house now, and my room no longer even looks like mine. Jake, too? Although he is courteous, he is too at ease for someone who is only meant to be here momentarily. He spends all of his time in the kitchen, cooking, watching TV, and generally behaving as though he owns the place. I've attempted to express my feelings to my mother, but she keeps ignoring me. She assures me that I need to learn more and that it's only temporary. She even had the audacity to accuse me of selfishness for whining when Jake and his children were having problems. However, I don't believe that wanting a little respect and care in my own house is selfish. Am I mistaken? I'm not sure how long I can put up with this. My mom seems to have forgotten about me entirely in her efforts to assist Jake. I know she wants to help him and cares about him, but at what price? Here, I feel like the victim. This is not just her home, and it used to be my home as well. I have no idea what that is now. Although Jake and his children moved here 3 days ago, it feels like weeks have passed. There was a sudden and overpowering change in the atmosphere of the house. It's difficult to describe, yet it no longer feels like home. Tiptoeing around strangers and avoiding getting in their way makes me feel like the visitor. Jake and his children, however, behave as though they had been here for ages. My mom seems quite content with the patterns they've established, routines that don't involve me. The most difficult night was the first one. As previously stated, I found myself sleeping on the couch because I had nowhere else to go. While I struggled to get by on a lumpy couch in the living room, Jake and his 2 children were well settled in my room, which I had spent years creating as my own. The unfairness of it kept coming to mind. I felt like a zombie by morning after tossing and turning all night. However, I reasoned that it was only transitory and that I would overcome it. Perhaps it won't be as horrible as I fear. It was terrible, to be honest. The house no longer felt at all like it was mine on the 3rd day. Jake's children were all over. As if they owned the house, they dispersed their belongings, shoes, backpacks, chargers, and miscellaneous snacks, all over it. Their juice bottles and cereal boxes littered the kitchen countertops. There was no space for my belongings because the bathroom shelves were piled high with their toiletries. And the roar, the noise, my God. There was no stillness anywhere because of their music, their chatting, and their incessant TV use. I'm a person who cherishes their personal space, so not having one was really annoying me. Jake was no better. He appeared totally comfortable, cooking in the kitchen, relaxing on the couch, and generally settling in. I once returned from a round of errands to find him seated on the couch where I usually sit, eating a sandwich as if he had lived there for years. Even though it was so minor, it truly annoyed me. I no longer even had the couch. In the meantime, my mother was behaving as though nothing was wrong. She was upbeat, talkative, and didn't appear to notice my discomfort. The fact that I was being forced to leave my own house seemed to go unnoticed by her. They also had pals over, which was the cherry on top. The third day was in the afternoon. When I got home from work feeling worn out and ready to pass out on the couch, I discovered that Jake and his children had brought some friends over. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, adults and teenagers, all chatting, laughing, and munching in the living room. They would prepare a small feast consisting of Coke, snacks, dips, and even some alcoholic beverages. It appeared to be a small gathering. When I went in, nobody bothered to acknowledge me, and I didn't recognize a single face. Feeling alienated in my own house, I stood there for a minute before slipping into the kitchen in silence. That moment struck me more strongly than anything else, and I'm not sure why. Perhaps the awareness that I didn't belong in the house while they did was the cause. Or perhaps it was the fact that my mother was sitting there, laughing and talking to everyone as though nothing was wrong. I felt unnoticeable. That night, I returned to the couch, but I didn't get any sleep. I lay there looking up at the ceiling and wondering how this had happened. I decided the following morning that I could no longer remain there. I couldn't continue to feel alienated in my own house while sleeping on the couch with strangers around me. While Jake and his children were living with us, I was unable to get the solitude, space, and tranquility I required. I so made the decision to temporarily move in with my friend. I knew she wouldn't mind because I'd stayed at her apartment a few times previously and she was always friendly. My mom didn't appear angry when I told her about my idea. She hardly responded at all, in fact. That hurt more than I anticipated when she just answered, "Okay, if that's what you want." I'm not sure what I was expecting, perhaps some recognition that something wasn't right, that she knew why I was leaving, but I didn't get it. Just a okay, and a shrug. It felt unreal packing away my belongings. I only brought a few personal belongings, some clothes, and toiletries. However, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was being pushed out even after packing everything into my suitcase. I called this place home. After years of living there, I was going because my mother had chosen to put her buddy and his children above me. What could I do, even though it didn't feel fair? My friend and I had an amazing life together. I was able to breathe for the first time in days. I had a bed of my own, a place of my own, and most importantly, quiet. Being there was 1,000 times better than being at home, and my friend understood and encouraged me. The bills, however, arrived later. Typically, my mother and I split all household expenses, including groceries, internet, and utilities. I was okay with the fact that it was always a shared duty. However, I no longer reside there. I didn't use the internet, water, or electricity. I didn't consume the meal. I told my mother I wasn't going to pay half the expenses when she texted me to remind me of this. She reacted instantly. To put it mildly, she was taken aback. She was unable to comprehend my refusal to pay. For me, however, it was straightforward. Why should I pay for a home that I don't occupy? Since I had practically been kicked out of my own house, why should I pay my bills? She wasn't happy when I told her this. She accused me of being petty, ungrateful, and self-centered. She stated I should be more understanding because Jake and his kids were going through a tough time. But since she didn't understand me, how could I be understanding? I refused to back down. I promised her that I wouldn't pay a dime until Jake and his children left and I could go back home. I didn't care that she didn't like it. This time, I had to establish limits. I have to put myself first. I'm now staying with my friend while I try to decide what to do next. I feel horrible about leaving, but I also feel like I had no other option. My mother's willingness to ignore my feelings for someone else was demonstrated to me in this circumstance. I'm not sure how long Jake and his children want to stay, but I'm not going to return until things change. After I first refused to pay the bills, a couple more days went by. I began adjusting to living at my friend's house during the time. In all honesty, I felt more at ease in her tiny apartment than I had in my own home in weeks since she had been so patient about the whole thing. For folks I hardly knew, I wasn't being made to give up my comfort or my personal space. I was beginning to feel normal again, and it felt like a secure haven. My mother then texted me once more. It was time for me to pay my share, she said, bringing up the bills again. My stomach fell when I received her message. Even though I knew this was coming, I was still quite frustrated. She had made me feel like a stranger in the house, so how could she really expect me to pay for it when I wasn't living there? In an attempt to remain composed, I inhaled deeply before responding and informing her that I would not be making the payment. I reiterated to her that I no longer resided there. I told her that she had made the independent decision to put Jake and his children before me and that she had invited them into our house without my permission. I promised not to return as long as they were residing in the house. Sincerely, I was sick of saying the same thing over and over again, so I was strong this time. She couldn't ask me to pay for a living arrangement that excluded me, even if she wanted to live with them. I also suggested that since Jake and his children were taking up all the resources I was paying for, he might be able to help if she needed it with the bills. What did she say? He can't. It seems that Jake's apartment still needed to be fixed following the flood, and she claims that he was unable to assist with our household expenses while simultaneously covering the cost of the repairs. She also mentioned that Jake and his children would probably be remaining for a few more weeks, which completely shocked me. Weeks. Weeks of strangers occupying what used to feel like my haven, weeks of them taking over my room, and weeks of me sleeping on a couch if I ever returned made my heart sink. What I was reading was unbelievable. In addition to allowing Jake and his children to stay for a short time, my mother had totally changed the dynamics of our home to accommodate them. She was now telling me that I had to keep making payments for a house that I didn't even feel comfortable in. I was enraged. As quietly as possible, I informed her that I would not be contributing to the costs if such were the case. Rather, I would be giving money to my friend, the one who had truly provided me with a warm and secure home. Since I was now more of a visitor in my friend's house than a resident of mine, I informed her that I would be helping to pay her bills. My mother lost it at that point. She bombarded me with texts accusing me of being ungrateful and self-centered. She said that I was punishing her for attempting to assist a friend in need, that I was wrecking her life, and that I didn't want her to be happy. She kept talking about how difficult Jake's circumstances were, how he had nowhere else to go, and how I had to be more sympathetic. All I could think about, though, was how she hadn't showed me the same level of comprehension. She hadn't informed me that Jake's children would be arriving. She hadn't inquired about my consent to them occupying my room. She made her choice without even thinking about how it would impact me. Was she now accusing me of being self-centered? She seemed to have entirely ignored anything I had been attempting to communicate. It couldn't be further from the truth to say that I wasn't unhappy because I didn't want her to be happy. I wished for her to have friends, be happy, and advance in life. But her enjoyment wasn't the point of this. She didn't seem to understand how much it stung that she had put someone else's comfort, her own child's comfort, above mine. Naturally, I felt bad. I adore her, and she is my mother. However, her remarks resonated. She gave the impression that I was a terrible, cold-hearted person who didn't give a damn about her welfare. How could I not feel deceived, though? It was about the idea behind it, not only Jake and his children. She didn't even consider asking me how I felt about it. She is now upset with me for establishing limits and advocating for myself. I decided to put myself first and wasn't going to back down the more I understood that I couldn't allow her to make me pay for anything that didn't benefit me. My mom was free to decide whether or not to assist Jake, but she had to deal with the fallout, including the financial strain. Given that I had effectively been kicked out of my house, it wasn't my responsibility to support their living arrangements. I'm staying at a friend's house for the time being and concentrating on the things I can manage. I've been assisting her with household duties and expenses, and it feels good to be a part of a family that genuinely values me. Throughout all of this, my friend has been invaluable, and I'm not sure what I would have done without her. I'm still upset and hurt over my mom, but I'm attempting to give myself some space to think things through. I have stated that I would not return until Jake and his children have left, but I am unsure of how long they will be staying. It's a difficult position, and I feel conflicted about taking care of myself against wanting to help my mom. However, I have to prioritize my health in the end. I don't care if that makes me selfish. Right now, I'm not sure if our relationship will ever be the same, so I just hope my mom understands how her actions have affected me before it's too late. It has been a couple more days since I last spoke to my mother. I continued to remain at my friend's house in an effort to concentrate on my work and adjust to the fact that I would no longer be living at home. To be honest, it was an odd sensation. I felt more at ease and liberated than I had in weeks, on the one hand. However, there was resentment lurking in the back of my mind. Knowing that you have unresolved stress looming over you makes it difficult to completely unwind. I was still very wounded by the way things had turned out, even though I didn't want to acknowledge it. My mother had chosen someone else over me, and I had been expelled from my own house. There was no way I could simply let it go. My mother then texted me once more one day. Her tone was quite different this time. Unlike before, she wasn't demanding or irate, rather, she expressed regret. She said that she was sorry for the way things had gone and that she was unaware of how deeply her choices had wounded me. She said that things would be different if I came home. She even promised to make an effort to get me a room of my own so I wouldn't have to sleep on the couch any longer. It was unbelievable to me. Did she actually make this choice now? And why couldn't this be done earlier? It was like being slapped in the face once more. She was offering me an arrangement that was equally as humiliating as the last time, in addition to asking me to return to a setting where I was obviously not a priority. How was I expected to feel better after that? How could I think anything had changed at all? When she revealed that she was struggling to pay the bills without my help, things became worse. I was truly pushed over the edge by this part. Was I meant to feel sorry now? I'm the bad guy now that everything has happened because I didn't pay for a house that I didn't even reside in? I didn't abandon her without warning. I repeatedly assured her that while Jake and his children were there, I would not be helping with household expenses. However, she attempted to use guilt to get me to return rather than dealing with the underlying issue. Her apology didn't appear sincere. It was about money, not about repairing things or repairing our relationship. And to tell the truth, that only made me more irate. I could feel my irritation boiling over as I read her message again. She obviously still didn't get why I had gone in the first place. She did express regret for the incident, but she refused to accept accountability for the choices that led to it. She refused to admit how much her behavior had wounded me. She only appeared interested in getting me back so I could resume paying the rent. I declined. While Jake and his children were still there, I informed her that I would not be returning. Furthermore, even after they went, I wasn't sure if I wanted to return. There was a breach of trust. I no longer felt the same sense of security and acceptance in that place. As I gave it more thinking, I came to the conclusion that perhaps it was time for me to move on. At that point, the thought of renting my own house started to cross my thoughts. Even though I wasn't rich, I had a reliable job and, with careful budgeting, I could afford a modest one-bedroom apartment. It would be mine, even though it would be tight. My own place, where I wouldn't feel out of place or have to answer to anyone. It was both thrilling and terrible to consider. Since I had never lived entirely alone before, the thought of making such a drastic change felt intimidating. However, it appeared to be the only practical remedy at the moment. I was unable to constantly switch between my mom's and my friends' homes. My friend was really supportive when I shared this concept with her. I could stay with her as long as I needed to, she said, and I should take my time. I felt like I was holding her back, even though her kindness meant the world to me. Although she would never admit it, I didn't want to cause her any trouble. I couldn't constantly invade her personal space because she had a life of her own. I therefore began searching for apartments. Finding something that appeared like a good fit didn't take long. It was a modest one-room apartment close to where I worked. Although it wasn't very noteworthy, it was tidy, reasonably priced, and most importantly, mine. I went to see it for myself, and I knew right away that this was the place I wanted to be. The thought of having a place of my own, a place where I might at last feel at home again, was liberating. A few days later, I signed the lease and began gradually relocating my belongings. I am incredibly grateful to my friend for all of her assistance during this process. She has always been my pillar of support, and I will always remember how she came through for me in my hour of need. In the meantime, I received a text from my mother requesting that I return. Her messages were a mix of desperation, anger, and apology. She continuously talked about how difficult life was without me, how much she missed me, and how she wished to put things right. However, the night Jake and his children arrived was the only thing on my mind whenever I received her texts. She invited them to sleep in my room without even asking, I reflected. I reflected on how she had disregarded my feelings when I expressed my discomfort to her. I recalled how, when I made the decision to go, she accused me of being self-centered. I choose to ignore her. I might as well disregard her now since she disregarded me when I most needed her. I did it to protect myself, not out of resentment. I couldn't return to a place where other people's wants and feelings would constantly take precedence over mine. I had to make a decision. As I write this, I'm sitting in my new apartment, trying to take it all in. Anger, grief, and relief have all been mixed together, but mostly I just feel liberated. I feel like I have control over my life for the first time in a long time. I'm not sure how my connection with my mother will develop in the future, but for now, I need time to recover and consider my options. Am I being self-centered by not going back to put myself first? Although I doubt it, some individuals might answer yes. Setting limits and being selfish, in my opinion, are two different things. In light of everything that transpired, I am not sorry for my decision. Now, on to the next story, Story 4. I babysat my brother on New Year's Eve, But he came home at 4 a.m. drunk and disrespected my time. Am I the asshole for being angry? I am a childless woman of 25 years of age. For weeks my friends and I had been anticipating a New Year's Eve celebration at a rooftop bar with delicious cuisine, live music, and a view of the fireworks. The tickets were previously paid for by me. My brother called 3 days before the new year. He needed a babysitter because he and his wife had been invited to a posh party. He asserted that they had exhausted all other options, including friends, neighbors, and babysitters. He guaranteed me they would return by 1 a.m. and promised to pay me twice. Unwilling to disappoint him, I reluctantly consented in the hopes of catching the last of my party. At 6 p.m. on New Year's Eve, I reached their home. My brother described the children's nighttime routine while they were still in their pajamas. I got the kids to bed around 8:30 p.m., and they departed at 7 p.m. I was thinking about how much fun my friends were having as I browsed through my phone at 10 p.m., while lounging on the couch. I told myself that I could join them in just a few hours. I texted my brother around midnight to see whether they were en route. No answer. I was irritated by 12:30 and attempted to contact him and his wife, but both calls went straight to voicemail. I even tried calling the location but got no response. I was alarmed when I saw a picture of them looking fantastic at the party on social media. I became angry instead of worried. They were ignoring me even though it was obvious they had their phones. I was angry at 2 a.m. I considered phoning their buddies but decided against it to avoid making a disturbance. I also left voicemails and texts. The kids slept peacefully, oblivious to my annoyance. When they finally arrived at 4 a.m., my brother was intoxicated and his wife was not doing much better. I got up and went up to them without saying hello. What the devil? You promised to return at 1 o'clock. How many times have I phoned you, do you know? My brother chuckled and said, calm down. The new year is here. You didn't have anything significant anyhow. I was shocked by his contemptuous demeanor. Did their plans take precedence over mine? Did my time not count? I informed him that I was sick of being treated disrespectfully and that if they were unable to honor my time or fulfill their commitments, I would no longer be able to watch the children. I was being dramatic, he replied, rolling his eyes. They only needed a night and couldn't find anyone, his wife muttered. The following morning, I received a text from my brother warning me that I was being careless. He stated I should be more understanding and that they deserve to enjoy themselves. He even called me selfish, which was absurd considering the circumstances. They mislead me and act as though my time is useless in return for my numerous attempts to assist them. He is now upset with me since I told him I would no longer babysit. He says I'm overreacting and that I'm punishing him and his wife for a single error. But to me, this is a pattern of conduct rather than just something that happens on New Year's Eve. The unwavering belief that I'll do anything to assist them and the total disregard for my personal boundaries. Because I adore my niece and nephew and don't want them to think I'm leaving them, I'm torn. However, I also believe that I must advocate for myself. When will I establish boundaries if not now? Is it my fault that I've decided to stop babysitting? First update. I began to feel as though things were calming down a few weeks after the New Year's Eve disaster. To be honest, it felt like a weight had been taken off my shoulders when I committed to my choice to stop babysitting for my brother. Even though I adore my niece and nephew, I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I was taken advantage of and treated disrespectfully. It was about respecting myself, setting limits, and appreciating my own time. My phone rang one evening. My brother was the one. I paused before answering, speculating about the topic of the call. He requested me to watch the kids after a clumsy beginning. He claimed that he and his spouse had no one else to turn to and were forced to work late. He expressed regret for the events of New Year's Eve, stating that they had learnt their lesson and that it was an isolated incident. He underlined how much they trusted me with the kids and assured them it wouldn't happen again. He even said that I was the only one who could manage them. Despite my want to believe him, I was unable to do so. They had not only arrived home late on New Year's Eve, but they had also completely disregarded my sentiments, my plans, and my time. I informed him that I couldn't. I clarified that, particularly after being humiliated the last time, I wasn't prepared to be in that situation once again. He did not protest, which surprised me. He didn't exert pressure. He simply hung up. For a brief period, I felt relieved since I had defended myself and believed that was the end of it. However, my phone called once more later that evening. It was my mom this time. I realized right away that she wasn't phoning to catch up when she called from overseas, where she had been residing for a few months. She immediately jumped in and expressed her disappointment at my refusal to assist my brother. She made statements that really resonated with me, such as, You know how hard it is for them to juggle work and kids. If I were there, I'd be happy to take the kids off their hands. She seemed to be attempting to guilt me into agreeing, and my feelings of conflict increased as she spoke. On the one hand, I was aware that I had every right to refuse. I didn't have to intervene each time my brother and his spouse required assistance. On the other side, the idea that my niece and nephew were entangled in it was devastating. I eventually gave in to my mother's persistent demands, which included statements like, "It's just for one night, and you're their family, you have to be there for them." Just for this one time, I promised her I would. With a tone of relief, almost triumph, she thanked me, and I hung up the phone with a mix of resignation and sadness. After work the following day, I arrived at my brother's place. My brother and his wife were on the verge of leaving, and the kids were already home, bouncing around the living room. They hurried left the door after saying only a brief, "Thank you." As if they were simply pleased that I had finally decided to help and didn't want to give me an opportunity to back out. I couldn't help but note how rushed they were. With the kids, I became accustomed to the evening routine: food, playtime, and bedtime. Everything seemed recognizable, almost reassuring in its consistency. As usual, the children were sweet and oblivious to the conflict between their parents and myself. I briefly questioned whether I had overreacted. Perhaps they truly had nowhere else to turn, and I was providing assistance during a time of true need. However, the resentment persisted throughout the night. I enjoyed spending time with the kids, but that wasn't the main focus. It was about how, after everything that had transpired, my brother and his wife had placed me in this predicament once more. I couldn't stop thinking about how my brother laughed when I told him how angry I was on New Year's Eve and how he discounted my sentiments. This was not a single error, rather, it was a pattern of total disregard for me as a human being with a life and obligations of my own. My brother texted me at around 9 p.m. to let me know they would be arriving home a little later than expected. I didn't respond. I remained silent. I simply hung up the phone and concentrated on getting the kids to sleep. Around 9:30, they eventually slept off, and I was left waiting for the door to open while sitting on the couch and watching the clock. They arrived home at midnight, which is somewhat later than I had committed to, but not as late as New Year's Eve. My brother said another halting "thank you" as they walked in, and I walked out without a word. I didn't think I could talk at that point without it becoming a heated debate. I was still apprehensive about the night before when I got up the following morning. All of the resentment I had been attempting to control was rekindled when my brother and his wife arrived home late once more. In addition to feeling used, I also felt torn. Perhaps they arrived at work quite late, perhaps they weren't taking advantage of me again. A part of me wanted to doubt them, but I kept thinking about it. I made some coffee and browsed through my phone before checking social media, which is a popular way to divert my attention from unresolved grievances. I found a tale that one of my brother's friends had posted as I was scrolling. It was an image of a welcoming cafe where people congregate to unwind and enjoy themselves. I didn't give it much thought at first, but then I saw that my brother and his wife were in the picture's backdrop. They appeared completely comfortable as they sat at a table, chatting and sipping drinks. I briefly believed it to be an old photograph, shot weeks or months ago. Then I noticed the timestamp, though. When I was at their house the previous evening, watching their children and wondering why they were getting home so late, I came across the post. They weren't at their jobs. They didn't experience an unforeseen crisis. I once again sacrificed my evening by sitting at their house while they were out having fun because I trusted their justifications. Anger and incredulity were brewing inside of me as I gazed at my phone. What were they able to do? They deceived me once more after all that transpired on New Year's Eve, despite all of the assurances and regrets. Even worse, they tricked me into believing that they needed my assistance because of an emergency. And I was duped once more. For some minutes, I was at a loss for what to do. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, act as though I hadn't noticed anything, and move on. However, my anger increased as I gave it more thought. This was a purposeful act of dishonesty, not only a small white lie. They purposefully chose to employ me since they knew I wouldn't consent to babysit in any other way. As if to make fun of me for thinking they would change, they took advantage of me once more. I was unable to stop. I texted my brother after opening my messaging app to let him know that I had seen the photos and that I was aware of his deceit. Despite my diminutive stature, I didn't hold back. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't gullible and that I wasn't going to ignore it. I waited for an answer while staring at my phone, feeling both anxious and excited. It was like adding salt to an open sore when he eventually responded. He acknowledged it. He claimed they lied since they were aware that I wouldn't have consented to babysit in any other situation. The evidence that my own brother and his wife had no trouble lying to me in order to obtain what they desired was there, in black and white. He made no attempt to explain it or claim that it was a misunderstanding, simply said, it was a premeditated move. Stunned, I sat there. There was nothing to say, and I wasn't even sure how to respond. I was stunned by the blatant insolence. It wasn't due to a breakdown in communication or a conflict in priorities. It was deceit and a total lack of concern for me personally. They viewed me as a convenience, someone they could utilize whenever it was convenient for them, rather than as a member of their family. In an attempt to comprehend what had just transpired, I set my phone aside and gazed out the window. Of course, I was angry, but I felt anguish more than anger. That I could be treated this way by my own brother was painful. It was painful that after repeatedly giving them the benefit of the doubt, I was shown to be mistaken. They took advantage of my trust and betrayed it. The remainder of the day was a blur. I was unable to concentrate on anything else. I repeatedly relived the incident in my mind, recalling all the instances in which I had sacrificed everything for them, putting their demands ahead of my own, only to be met with deceit and manipulation. The pattern was more important than the cafe shot alone. Utter disregard for me as an individual with a life and priorities of my own. I made a choice at the end of the day. I had had enough of babysitting and going above and above for individuals who obviously didn't appreciate me. There was no use in me confronting my brother anymore. He had stated unequivocally that he saw nothing wrong with his behavior. But this time, I was determined to set a real barrier. Put an end to babysitting. No more hurried phone calls. No more feeling guilty about giving up my time and effort for folks who couldn't even be honest with me. I experienced an odd sensation of relief as I sat there thinking about everything. Yes, it hurt, but it was liberating as well. I was at last prioritizing myself, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt that I was acting in the best interests of myself, not my mother or brother. Second update. After a few days, I was trying my best to move on from my brother's treachery, even though I was still hurting. I had no intention of talking to him anymore. No matter how much guilt, manipulation, or slick talk I received, I had already decided that I would never again babysit. It wasn't worthwhile. I had tried to be the helpful, trustworthy sister for far too long, only to be taken advantage of and lied to. I assumed that if the matter didn't resolve itself, it was their fault, not mine. My phone then rang. It was my mother. At first, I didn't give it much thought, thinking it would be a friendly conversation or perhaps another attempt by her to coerce me into assisting my brother. But I knew something wasn't right as soon as I responded. She seemed annoyed, almost accusing, and I instantly prepared myself for whatever was about to happen. She got right into it, claiming that after talking to my brother, he informed her that I hadn't watched the kids that evening. I initially believed I had misheard her. She couldn't be saying what I believed her to be saying, surely. She continued, however, reciting what he had told her, namely that they had hired a nanny since I had declined to assist. My brother reportedly informed her that they intended to keep employing nannies since, in his view, I wasn't good with kids. I was taken entirely by surprise and startled. I had no idea how to interpret what I was hearing. In addition to deceiving me and tricking me into watching the kids that evening, my brother was now lying to our mother about what had transpired. To make things worse, he was making fun of me by suggesting that I couldn't possibly take care of my niece and nephew. He seemed to be trying to twist the story to make himself appear like the victim and was stepping up his disdain, which felt like a slap in the face. Naturally, my mother seemed to believe him. She began to ask, "Why didn't you just lend a hand?" She had obviously accepted his account of events without questioning anything, saying things like, "It's not that hard to watch kids for one evening." To be honest, that was nearly as painful as the falsehoods themselves. I had spent years demonstrating my dependability, my concern for my family, and my willingness to lend a hand whenever necessary. However, she was prepared to disregard all of it because my brother had made up a preposterous tale to hide his identity. I sat there trying to figure out why he would tell such a falsehood. Was it shame, guilt, or just another instance of his avoiding responsibility for his actions? Perhaps he didn't want to tell our mother that he and his spouse had lied to me about having to work late, or that they had gone out to a cafe while I was at home with the kids. Perhaps it was simpler for him to blame me, to make it appear that I was the one who had failed them, than to acknowledge that he had been dishonest. I couldn't believe he would go to such lengths though, whatever of his motivations. It was now more about the idea behind it than it was about myself. He was trying to harm my reputation in our family by lying to our mother. For what purpose? To keep one's face intact? To escape accountability for his deeds? I didn't see how he could defend it to himself, and it felt harsh and petty. I came to the conclusion that there was no use in attempting to tell my mother the truth while she continued to speak. Her decision was already made. He had likely been extremely convincing in his account of events, and I knew my brother. I didn't have the energy to dispute because it would just become a he said, she said situation. In addition, I had the feeling that it wasn't worth anything at all. Perhaps it said more about my mother than it did about me if she was so willing to believe him without hearing my side of the story. I hardly responded, letting her speak. I hung up and sat there looking at my phone when the discussion finally finished. I was exhausted, dejected, and most of all, extremely wounded. It was more than simply the lies. It was about my own brother using me as a scapegoat to hide his inappropriate behavior, and my mother mindlessly supporting it. I repeatedly reenacted the scenario in my mind over the course of the following few days. I reflected on the numerous occasions I had gone above and beyond to support my brother, the sacrifices I had made for him and his family, and the apparent lack of appreciation on his part. I reflected on how my mother had assumed the worst about me without even attempting to get my side of the story, and how she had been so quick to support him. And the more I gave it more thought, the more I saw that this went beyond what had just transpired. My brother was always the golden child, who could do no wrong, and I was supposed to take the fall for it. It was about a pattern, a dynamic that had existed for years. I briefly contemplated going up to my brother, confronting him, exposing his deception, and requesting an explanation. However, that idea appeared less tempting the more I considered it. What would it achieve? He had previously demonstrated his unwillingness to accept accountability for his deeds. To confront him would just result in more manipulation, more falsehoods, and more excuses. To be honest, I didn't require such negativity in my life. I made the decision to stand back instead. I began concentrating on myself, stopped talking to my mother about the problem, and stopped returning my brother's calls. It wasn't simple. A part of me was concerned about how my connection with my niece and nephew could be impacted by the friction in my family, which I detested. However, I also realized that I couldn't continue to put myself in precarious circumstances where I was treated disrespectfully and taken advantage of. Ultimately, I understood that establishing boundaries was about protecting myself, not about punishing others. It was about not allowing the behavior of others to determine my value as a person. And although it was painful to take a step back, it was also freeing to prioritize myself at last. Third update: I avoided my mother and brother in the weeks and months that followed. Although it was a difficult choice, it was essential. I came to the realization that I needed time to recover and take care of myself after everything that had transpired. I made the decision to leave it all because the ongoing drama, deception, and disrespect had worn me down. Restoring my feeling of self-worth and establishing a life where I felt appreciated and respected were more important than merely establishing boundaries. I devoted all of my time to my career and interests throughout this period. I spent more time with friends, who never made me feel like I was asking too much simply for being there and who always gave me unwavering support. In addition to trying new things I had been putting off for years, like joining a local book club and taking up yoga, I began to accept social invitations more frequently. I was able to find who I was outside of the family dynamics that had taken up so much of my energy thanks to these seminars. I first met my boyfriend on one of these outings with pals. I never would have imagined how he would alter my life. We first met at a small get-together at the home of a mutual acquaintance. I wasn't really excited to go at first since I was still dealing with the emotional fallout from everything that had happened to my family. However, my pals were correct when they said it would benefit me. I met him through a friend of a friend. During a card game, we wound up sitting next to each other, and what began as lighthearted teasing over who would win evolved into a meaningful, interesting discussion. He was kind, focused, and sincerely interested in what I was saying. I felt heard and seen for the first time in a long time. We discussed everything from job to favorite movies to hobbies, and at the end of the night, I couldn't recall ever laughing so hard. We began seeing each other on a regular basis after that evening. Initially, it was informal, coffee dates, park walks, and late-night phone conversations that continued into the morning. However, as the weeks passed, it became evident that this was something unique. In ways I didn't realize I needed, he was patient, kind, and encouraging. He reminded me that it's acceptable to put my own needs first, respected my limits, and pushed me to advocate for myself. It was refreshing to spend time with him. He didn't have the manipulation or emotional baggage I was so accustomed to from my family. Rather, he helped me realize that not all relationships need to be stressful or conflictual by bringing stability and optimism into my life. Additionally, he assisted me in managing my feelings toward my family by advising me to handle the matter diplomatically while also reminding me that it was acceptable to leave if it was negatively impacting my mental well-being. Now to the next story 5. My sister flirted with my boyfriend and attacked me when confronted. Drama erupted at my wedding when my parents forced a reconciliation. I'm 28, and my sister is 26. We haven't communicated for about 6 years because of a terrible tragedy, which I will explain in a bit. As we grew up, my parents, for whatever reason, never discouraged our intense sibling rivalry. They urged us to compete instead. In retrospect, I don't think that was a wise decision because it made us incredibly jealous of one another. If they had dealt with this sooner, maybe our relationship would have been better. We could sometimes put aside our differences while we were younger, but as we grew older, our hostility increased. When we got to high school, we didn't talk much to one another, and we both liked it that way. I only saw my sister when I returned home from college after high school. Compared to being with someone who was disagreeable all the time, this was a relief. I started dating my fiancé around the time I was about to graduate. After 3 years of friendship, he finally worked up the nerve to ask me out right before I graduated. I said yes as we had been friends for years and I thought he was amazing. He and I moved in together after I graduated. After 3 months of dating, I made the decision to present him to my parents one weekend. It just so happened that my sister, who had just begun college, chose to stay at home that same weekend. With both of us present at the same moment, it was already a formula for disaster. My life was going great at that point. I had my own apartment, a job, and a cute partner. But things weren't going as smoothly for my sister. She was disappointed that she couldn't get into her first choice of college and had to settle for her second. Later, my parents explained that she kept returning home so often because she was struggling to make friends at college. I could tell my sister wasn't happy when I told my parents about my relationship. As I introduced him to him, she pouted in the background. When I introduced her, she instantly turned on her charm, despite the fact that my partner was aware of the strained relationship I had with her. It felt weird, but I tried not to let it upset me. Then, however, things became much stranger. While we were all sitting around, my sister continued trying to chat to my boyfriend since she was too interested in his life. Despite our discomfort, neither of us spoke. Then she went too far. During dinner, she started to overtly flirt with him in front of me. She was obviously trying to irritate me. She wasn't subtle. I attempted to ignore my family's turmoil for a while since I didn't want my partner to notice. I finally lost it though, as she went on. I became enraged as she was openly flinging herself at him. I informed her that her behavior was disgusting and told her to stop. She continued to speak to him while rolling her eyes. That's when I lost it. I screamed at her, telling her that since she was making him feel uncomfortable, she should respect him as he was my guest. Even worse was her reaction. Helping my boyfriend realize he had alternatives and that he deserved better, she remarked with a sly smile. I was angry at the way she stated it. We began yelling at one another, and I became so irate that I branded her a loser and said she was resentful because she wasn't performing as well as I was. That struck a chord. The words had a profound effect on her, and before I could respond, she snatched my hair and gave me a slap across the table. I was too shocked to react at first because we hadn't fought physically since middle school. However, the situation swiftly turned into a full-fledged altercation. My boyfriend and our parents had to break us up because we had gotten so violent. We were both bruised and scratched by the end, yet we were still yelling at one another. After attempting to reassure me the entire time, my partner was able to finally pull me away, get me into the car, and drive us home. I was glad to have him on my side since without him, the conflict might have lasted even longer. I didn't speak to my sister at all after that happened. We had argued before, but it had never been this savage. This was the last straw for me. It was already easier living apart from her, and I no longer felt compelled to think of her as a member of my family. Even though my sister wasn't prepared to apologize, my parents called me the day after the fight to let me know they had chastised her and hoped we might work things out in the end. I informed them that I was not interested in finding a solution. I wanted our connection to stay as it was, non-existent, and I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. I reminded my parents that they were partially responsible when they attempted to persuade me otherwise. They had, in a sense, encouraged our intense sibling rivalry while we were growing up and had never addressed it. My sister and I didn't want to be around each other, so they weren't shocked. They disagreed with me, so we got into a fight about it. They admitted their error and apologized over the phone a few days later. I've forgiven them, even though it felt a little empty at the time. I didn't want to break up contact with my parents, even if I had decided to stop talking to my sister. That incident happened 6 years ago, and I haven't spoken to my sister since. As long as they don't put any pressure on me to get back together, I don't mind if she and my parents continue to have a regular contact. We don't talk much, and even on holidays, we avoid each other, even though I've seen her at family get-togethers. That's how I like it. We don't get along, and everyone in the family knows it, but nobody knows why. They just know that we got into a fight and that none of us has looked good ever then. After 6 years of concealing the information, I eventually came clean at my bridal shower. Because we weren't precisely adhering to traditional norms, my maid of honor only invited close friends and family, including my fiancé, to the ceremony. My parents surprised me by inviting my estranged sister as well. What they were thinking, I don't know. I was in disbelief when my folks showed up with her. My sister appeared just as shocked to see me. And tense standoff occurred as the room went silent. My parents came over to us after what seemed like an eternity and said that enough time had gone by and that they hoped we could get back together. They thought we were now older and wiser. My sister's look made it obvious that our parents had deceived her into going. I told my parents that on such a significant day, they had no right to surprise me. I gently but forcefully requested my parents to accompany my sister on her departure before she could say anything. Instead of leaving, they insisted that I move on from the past while pretending that nothing important had occurred. Their contemptuous behavior angered me. I gave a detailed account of the full incident that occurred 6 years ago in order to correct the record. I asked whether everyone in the room believed I could just forgive and move on after making sure everyone knew exactly what had transpired. I then went to my parents and asked, would you still believe it was so easy to let go if I had married someone else? Of this, things would have turned out differently if I had wed someone else. However, when I first took him home to meet the family, my sister had shamelessly flirted with the man I was marrying. In front of me, she had done it without guilt, as if he were a competitor in a competition he had never agreed to. She did all of that, but more than that, she attacked me first because I called her out on it and called her a loser. It was traumatic for me because I had never before experienced someone attempting to physically harm me in that manner. She never apologized to me in the 6 years that followed, acting as though nothing had happened. I didn't feel pressured to let go of the past or forgive her. I thought it was more crucial to keep myself safe and keep someone like her out of my life. It was ridiculous of my parents to think they could just take her to my bridal shower and expect us to get back together. Luckily, my sister recognized her error and departed before my parents could continue their argument. I imagined my sister wasn't happy about being duped too, so my mother followed her, probably to please her. For a brief period, my father stayed with me, but I told him that he had let me down and that I didn't want to speak to him at that time. I was acting like a brat, and he got annoyed and accused me of being unreasonable, saying that it was pointless to cling to something that had happened 6 years before. I told him to go because I didn't want to quarrel with him, even though I didn't think I was being a brat. After a few minutes, he departed. I had to take a few moments to gather myself after that since I was so overwhelmed. Thankfully, I had the support of my fiancé and maid of honor, and I quickly returned to my normal self. Since I needed a diversion and didn't want to worry about my dad or sister, everyone else complied. We carried on with the festivities as if nothing had occurred. My fiancé and I went home after the encounter and didn't talk about it again. Since the incident, which happened around 5 days ago, I had not heard from my parents, but I was fine with it. After what they did, I thought we should take a break. I didn't anticipate hearing from them immediately, but they did finally get in touch, not to apologize, but to blame me for my sister's situation. My mom called this morning. When I replied, she told me to get in touch with my aunt and make sure she gave my sister the job she had been talking about. My mother was upset and scared, and I had no idea what she was talking about, so I told her to calm down. She continued by explaining that layoffs and downsizing at her prior workplace had left my sister unemployed for about 6 months. A few weeks ago, she realized she could no longer afford the rent and had to return to live with our parents. She had been looking for work, but she had not been able to locate a position that paid enough or that she enjoyed. My aunt, who was starting a new business, and my mother had talked about this. My aunt had originally decided to make my sister the head of marketing because she had prior marketing experience. But after the bridal shower incident, when I told my aunt what had happened 6 years earlier, she stopped responding and finally canceled the offer. I wasn't shocked because I had always been my aunt's favorite, and I thought that was a reasonable explanation. My aunt replied that it was clear from her knowledge of the incident I recounted that my sister had serious anger management problems when my mother forwarded her mail to me. The fact that my sister had not even apologized during the bridal shower infuriated my aunt. In addition, my aunt said that although she had originally decided to hire my sister due to their familial ties, she had just interviewed a better qualified applicant for the position. Instead, she made the decision to offer the job to the better qualified candidate. That made perfect sense to me, and I was really happy that my aunt had changed her mind. After receiving my aunt's note, I told my mother that there was nothing I could do about it. I wanted to avoid my aunt feeling pressured to recruit my sister just because they were related, as I had witnessed the detrimental impacts of nepotism in the workplace. It was evident that my aunt had identified a more qualified candidate for the position, which was the true reason my sister was not employed. I didn't want to get involved because my aunt was in charge of this. My mother became irate when I promised her that I wouldn't attempt to harm my sister's standing or reputation in the family. At my bridal shower, she started screaming at me, saying that I had ruined my sister's chances by bringing up the past. Considering how much it would affect my sister, she said I didn't need to bring up the incident at my bridal shower. She said I deliberately portrayed my sister as unstable and evil in order to win the family's pity and position myself as the nice one. Just so you know, when I described the incident, I wasn't concealing anything. I freely acknowledge that prior to her physical assault, I had called her a loser. But I don't think her violent response was justified by the name-calling. My mother's accusation that I brought up the incident purely to harm my sister's reputation was unfair. After giving it some thought, I hung up the phone and blocked my parents. I wondered if it was the correct thing to bring up the past. My mother had claimed over the phone that I hadn't given my sister a fair opportunity to demonstrate her growth over the years and that it was unkind of me to bring up the fight, particularly when it cost her a job offer. First update. Hello Reddit. I want to thank everyone who took the time to leave a comment before I talk about what transpired after my first post. Thank you very much for your guidance and good remarks. Since my sister had previously been prohibited from contacting me for 6 years, my parents were unable to get in touch with me directly after I blocked them. They chose to visit my home since they had no other choice. With my wedding just a few weeks away, I was overburdened and very busy getting ready. I had just gotten home from work that day, and my fiancé and I had a last-minute wedding dress fitting planned. I instructed them to go when they showed there without an invitation. We knew that if we opened the door, they would continue the talk and aggravate me much more, so we didn't want to interact. They remained even after I threatened to contact the police. To be honest, I didn't want to contact the police since I didn't want to handle the problem that way and it felt over the top. We agreed to let them in for a little talk, hear their side of the story, and end it there after talking it over with my fiancé. After deciding on a course of action, we let them in and warned them to hurry because we had other obligations. Thankfully, my folks quickly got to the point. They clarified that my behavior at the bridal shower was the reason my aunt had withdrawn her offer of employment to my sister. They said that I was to blame for my sister's situation and asked that I contact my aunt to make sure she was hired. I paid attention, but I didn't want to say it again. Since it was the same argument, I told them that since I had already called my mother, there was nothing I could do about it. It didn't make sense for them to come to my house and talk about it again since they knew I was busy and getting married in a few weeks. I was interrupted by my sister, who said they had come for reasons other than the job offer. This was our first chat in 6 years, so I was surprised. She continued by saying that she felt obligated to apologize, which is why she chose to come. At the moment, I was unsure of how to feel. To be honest, I had severe misgivings and didn't trust her intentions. I chose to be straightforward and inquired as to whether she sincerely wanted to apologize or if she was merely doing so in hopes of getting the job. I informed her that because I couldn't help her, there was no use in wasting her breath if it was only about the work. Although she appeared a little taken aback by my candor, she said that our parents were present to talk about the job and that she had come to apologize. Even my parents appeared astonished when I looked at them, indicating that they hadn't discussed this. But my sister seemed unconcerned. She reaffirmed that she had no interest in the job and was only come to apologize. She claimed to have thought back on her behavior during the previous 6 years, but she had always found an excuse not to apologize. She was unable to deny that she had mistreated me after the bridal shower. Her tone and manner conveyed that she was serious, even if my fiancé and I were still processing the situation. She said that she had harbored resentment toward me since she was a young child, because she felt compelled to compete with me constantly. She felt guilty for squandering her childhood and adolescence on that rivalry, now that she saw how pointless it was in the real world. She was sad that we could have become friends, given that I had tried to get in touch with her multiple times. Because she always viewed me as a rival, she acknowledged pushing me away. It was very overwhelming to hear her speak all of this, and I'm ashamed to say that I started crying as she expressed her emotions. She then turned to face my fiancé and expressed regret for the way she had behaved toward him during their one and only meeting. She admitted that it was long past for her to apologize and that her preoccupation with outdoing me had caused her to lose sight of who she had become. When she was done, she didn't wait for a reply. She merely said that she needed to express herself and that we didn't have to forgive her. She promised not to disturb us again now that she had. Only my parents, my fiancé, and I remained in the room after she departed. We sat there in startled silence, trying to take in what had just transpired, None of us expecting this. My parents eventually departed without saying anything, and my fiancé and I went as scheduled to my fitting. Until we arrived home, we didn't talk about any of it. We started discussing my sister's apology approximately 30 minutes ago. Despite the 6-year delay, I thought my sister's apology was incredibly sincere and mature. My fiancé and I are still processing things, so we aren't sure if we should forgive her. I'm glad she recognized we could have been friends, and I've unblocked her, but I need more time to reassure her that everything is really okay. Second update. I neglected to include my parents in my last update. Since their visit a few days ago, they have not gotten in touch with us. Since they haven't expressed regret for what they did, we want to stay away from them. Because they encouraged rather than resolved the conflict between my sister and me, I consider them responsible. Their disregard for my sisters and my sentiments is evident, even after years of conflict and my attempts at forgiveness. We'll let them know in a few days that they won't be invited to the wedding. Third update. I was married last week, and it was a stunning, ideal day. My parents were not present, as was to be expected. They sent an email stating that they would not be attending, stating that they no longer wanted to be a part of our lives because my sister and I had stigmatized them. I don't mind if that's what they decide to do. On a more positive note, I contacted my sister prior to the wedding to welcome her to the event and to accept her apology. Having her there made the day even more memorable, and she accepted with grace. I'm happy to be getting back in touch with her, even if it's unbelievable to consider how far we've come. My husband and I are excited about our honeymoon, and life is better than ever. Now to the next story 6. Stepdad takes my mom and his kids on vacation, leaving me home alone. I move to my dad's, and everything falls apart. I'm a 16-year-old guy in high school. 2 years ago, my mother married Eddie, my stepdad. Eddie is 42 years old. My mother is 40. My parents never entered into marriage. Actually, I was the product of a very brief fling following college that they assumed would last a few months. Then my mother started to conceive. She hired me since she wanted to end the pregnancy without calling for termination. My dad has shared custody of me since he too wants to participate in my life. Every month I move residences, spending the year alternately with my mother and my father, therefore distributing my time equally between them. I love my parents. I know both of them have given quite a lot of sacrifices for me to remain close by. The first and most important one is that they have spent years living in the same city, hence I wouldn't find the travel between the two houses to be too challenging. Previously unaware of this, now I see that both of my parents had to forfeit several chances to progress in their professions in order to stay in the same city and live near each other, all for my benefit. Thanks to me, my mother also had to turn away countless guys who were totally in love with her. Her priorities should have been parenting me rather than getting married and juggling her personal life, work, and husband. Eddie helped me to learn all these things. He is not precisely the ideal stepfather one could want for. To help me to accept him, my mother had to go over all of this with me. If she could make so many sacrifices for my sake, she believes I should be able to at least somewhat repay the favor and embrace Eddie. Since I never asked her to make such sacrifices, I find it difficult to properly grasp how that reasoning holds. She could have readily ended the pregnancy or allowed my father take over completely rearing me. Still, I love her and want her to be happy, so I never fought with her about it. Though Eddie wasn't a very lovely guy, I was eager to welcome him. By not a nice guy, I mean he is not nasty to me in any sense. Simply said, he doesn't like me. He doesn't try to hide it. Though I'm not sure what kind of 42-year-old has problems with a 16-year-old guy, he most certainly does. Since I never offended him, I'm not sure why he hates me. Actually, I have always tried to be friendly to him since my family taught me to treat everyone kindly, even if they show you their dislike of you. He never remarks on me and never talks to me disrespectfully. He doesn't talk to me at all, hence the reason behind this is straightforward. For the past 3 years, he acts as though I don't exist in the household. I have no idea what I ever done to irritate him, but one day he simply decided he would not be talking to me and would be acting as though I wasn't there at all. The craziest thing on earth, and I'm not really used to this type of treatment. He seems to be treating me coldly for something, but I'm not sure what that is. Not knowing what his issue with me is, I can't even change my conduct. According to my mother, that is his natural state. He doesn't particularly like me, but he doesn't have any problems with me. But, especially when you're 42 and the other person is essentially just 16, I believe that if you dislike someone there should at least be a cause for it. It probably relates to the dynamics of my being the first kid of my mother or anything. I have no idea either. He has made it rather clear that he hates me at least generally. We used to get along reasonably earlier. He would communicate with me and ask all kinds of questions about my life when he arrived home first few times. I would reply to him quite politely. But he just decided he would not be talking to me following one visit. It was quite haphazard, and at the time I had no idea why he did that. Originally, I didn't ask questions since I assumed he might have simply forgotten to say hello or anything. But then it occurred so often that it became difficult to overlook. Given that my mother was behaving as though I hadn't been in the house, I even asked her whether I had done anything to irritate him. Every time I walked into the living room or any whatever room he was in, he would turn his face away. Regarding that, my mother gave me no particular precise advice. She just explained that he was attempting to process the reality that he would now have to deal with the presence of me. Perhaps he was merely not used to it as he had only dated women without children prior to this. Given his own 2 children, I found it difficult to believe. His 2 sons were 12 and 15 years old respectively. After the younger brother was born, their mother died in an accident. I used to see my dad every other month, hence it was untrue that I would stay there all the time. Still, a few months went by and finally I came to terms with Eddie's reality, that he was not going to talk to me any longer. Eddie proposed to my mother after a year of dating, and few months later they were married. Eddie moved in the residence with his children following their marriage. I had only visited his children a few times before, and even then their father had instructed them not to talk to me. It was simply so insane. I have no idea how I handled that for years. As a matter of fact, Eddie and my mother used to live apart before marriage since Eddie's mother stayed with him and was quite ill. He moved his mother in with his sister so she could look after her once they were married. Then Eddie brought his kids into our house. Though I'm not sure if any of you have actually gone through this, living in the same house with several people who won't interact with you and pretend you don't even exist is rather difficult. I had to put up with that, and based on their treatment of me, I felt like I was some sort of criminal, which made me terribly depressed. The worst aspect was that I never found out initially what I did wrong. I still have no idea. At least I'm not living with them anymore, hence it makes no difference. Years went by and their behavior remained the same, despite my adaptation to it. Eddie not talking to me whenever he came over to see my mother was already second nature to me, given his frequency. I grew used to him and his children living in the same house with me and not talking to me when they got married. Every time I visited my mother, I had to get ready psychologically to solely chat to her for the following few weeks. The only person who would talk to me in that house was her. Everybody else pretended I was invisible, absent. Although it hurt, I had to learn to deal with it as I wanted to spend time with my mother. She was not going to discuss it with Eddie, I knew. Trust me, I tried to persuade her several times to approach him about it, find out more, or at least try to resolve this. She informed me she had already discussed it with him, but she could not reveal to me some personal reasons. He thus denied to recognize my existence. She knew where Eddie was coming from, hence she could not act about it in the house as she also knew why I felt guilty about it. I would simply have to swallow it and deal with it though. She would get emotional and tell me I was being unappreciative if I tried to stand up for myself and dispute with her as I was forgetting the fact she had made so many sacrifices for me. She thought I could surely deal with it for her benefit and pass Eddie for acting the way he did. Though I wanted to argue with her, I knew I would damage her emotions. I never even told my father about any of this as I knew he would be rather irate and would most certainly confront my mother about it should he find out. Often they had tiny conflicts and arguments since they were rather different people with rather different opinions on how to raise me. But I knew that something this big would most likely cause my father to seek extreme behavior or file for complete custody. I avoided telling him and acted as though everything was good with my mother and her new family since I wanted to avoid starting conflict. Eddie and my mother had been living together for 2 years following 1 year of dating before they were married. I have so been tolerating this kind of behavior for 3 years now. I have been stretched quite thinly and pushed to my breaking point. Something lately truly drove me over the line, and I realized I could not continue to put up with this. I was meant to spend last month at my mother's place. Eddie and his children had been excluding me as usual. Having been arguing with some of my school classmates, I was already going through a difficult period and truly not in the appropriate frame of view at the time. Then, one morning 2 weeks ago, I woke up to discover the house was totally empty. Over that, I began to go crazy. Everything had been usual, or as normal as it gets at my mother's house, up until the evening before. Though they had all been ignoring me and chatting to one another, no mention of them traveling anyplace was made. But when I got up the following morning, the house was deserted. I asked about it right away, phoning my mother. Though I had no idea where they were, happily my mother answered the call. She told me she and the kids were heading out on a small trip for the week and requested me to stay in the house and take care of it when I asked her what they were doing. Right now I'm on summer break, hence I have no classes and not really have to travel anyplace. I do not, however, believe it appropriate to leave me at home alone and expect me to operate like a watchdog. I told my mother as much, that I was not ready to spend all day observing the house from home. I was not on board with that plan. If she desired something like that, she most likely ought to have just increased the protection surrounding her house rather than fooling me into remaining at home. Their leaving me at home all by myself and not even informing me about their intention to go on a road trip infuriated me most as well. Not even the politeness to let me know about it ahead of time allowed me to make an informed decision on whether or not to undertake it. As a male in high school, there is practically nothing more we want than an empty house all to ourselves. So, I most likely would have answered yes. I might have lived it for a few days after inviting a handful of my buddies over. But my mother was treating me like garbage, so I was so enraged that I didn't even feel like doing it. It made me quite sick. I wasn't really having anyone to invite at the time since I was also battling with my buddies. I was just living through a generally terrible period. I advised my mother to apologize to me for doing this. Eddie disliked talking to me, so I could understand that, but the very minimum they could do was let me know they were headed somewhere before they went. Not very pleasant to wake up one morning and discover you are by yourself. She advised me that I should get over it as I was exaggerating things. She simply hung up the call. She did not even wait for my response. She texted me instead of answering when I tried to contact her back, claiming to be trying to enjoy her trip and would chat to me once she arrived at the hotel. Everything infuriated me so much that I chose to walk away. Though I knew the house would be empty upon departure, I didn't give a damn. My calls went straight to voicemail when I attempted phoning my mother once more to let her know I was going. She did not respond. My mother typically leaves the house locked, so I locked it and left the keys under a potted plant. I then headed over to live with my dad. My father had anticipated me to be living with my mother until the end of the month, so he was genuinely startled to see me back so early once I got there. But I had enough, therefore I just returned to him. I ultimately told him everything that had been happening. I told him all about Eddie and his outrageous actions toward me as well as how he had even instructed his children not to interact with me. It was getting on me since I felt as though I had done something wrong even though I had no idea what it was. Then, regardless of how much it hurt, I told him my mother simply wanted to let things go as it was and refused to even discuss this with Eddie. Eddie had personal motives, which she felt were legitimate, thus her justification was that. She wasn't even ready to tell me what those motives were though, so I could understand the events around me. I had tolerated this for long enough, only for the benefit of my mother. She constantly reminding me of the things she had given up in her life to make me happy. She cited this as grounds for why I need to put up with Eddie's actions. But I was not going to take it anymore as this was becoming really excessive. I turned around. My father needed to know what my mother was subjecting me to, hence I had to inform him. Though I had done nothing to offend anyone, I was just so sick and tired of being treated like this, thus maybe he could be able to act about the matter. I had always aimed to treat everyone kindly and compassionately. I then informed him about how my mother had left me at home alone without even letting me know Eddie, his children, or her were on travel plans. She simply wanted me to make sure everything was in order, look after the house, and live on my own for the following week. That hardly constituted my main concern. Her lack of understanding of the need of informing me about it ahead of time caused me much trouble. She hung up and turned away my calls when I tried to chat to her, as if I didn't count to her. She had definitely crossed the line, and I could not stand it anymore. I started crying after I completed telling my father all of this. I had not known exactly how much over the past few years all of this had been weighing on me. Before she met Eddie, my connection with my mother was normal. Then, everything changed and nothing was the same afterwards. It was quite tough for me to understand. I felt small to her. When I vented to my father, he just told me he was going to look after everything for me coming forward. He clearly was agitated, but he did not show me his irritation. Rather, he told me he was happy I had shared with him and that right now it was all on my chest. He reassured me that I would be living with him from then on. If I ever wanted to visit my mother, it would be my decision only, but he would not advise it. I have been living with my father since then. I never tried to call my mother following that day. The odd thing was she never tried to phone me either. She had left her son at home all alone, so the least she could have done was stay in touch with him as she traveled with her new family. What she had done had emotionally wounded me, but after talking to my father, I felt much lighter. I had resolved myself not to let this disturb me. We seldom spoke for 5 days or so. Then, when my mother called at last, I assumed it would be to check on me. She was screaming at me at the top of her lungs when I answered the call, though. The house had been stolen, hence it took me some seconds to understand she was yelling. Apparently, Several of their possessions, including the TV and a few other pricey items, were now gone. She was attributing all of it to me for some reason. Given I had tried to let her know I was leaving and would be staying with my father, I'm not sure why. I told her I was offended with her treatment once she stopped screaming. I then reminded her that although I had tried to get in touch her numerous times after she hung up on me, she had continuously turning down my calls. I could have texted her instead, she informed me. Although that was a good point, I said I was upset and I didn't text her on intention. She shouldn't have expected me to stay in the first place since I thought it was quite clear that I was unhappy. We started a rather intense argument on it. She had been depending on me and thought I should have stayed at home no matter how furious or irritated I was since it was a safety issue. I informed her I never promised to shoulder such accountability. She ignored all of my calls even though I had tried my best to let her know I was leaving and didn't want to be home alone. She now had to deal with the results of her acts, not mine. That they, including Eddie, were trying to attribute this on me seemed absurd. Eddie visited me for the first time in years only to rage at me and accuse me of being reckless. He even mentioned some perplexing things, such as he had always known I would be the reason they fell apart. We hardly interact at all, hence I have no idea what that implies. How he arrived to that opinion without ever interacting with me is unknown. In any case, I agree with my dad as he believes this is my mom's fault and my parents are now bickering. My mother argues, nonetheless, that I am responsible. She is now demanding that my father cover the damages and contends that, should he be defending me, he should be ready to cover the expenses. Not sure what to do right now. She claims she will drop the issue provided I at least apologize to her and her family. Though I also don't want her to keep pestering my father, I do not want to do that. Am I terrible for leaving my mother's house empty to go live with my father after she and my stepdad left me home alone to travel with his family without even trying to tell me? Update 1. 2 weeks after the incident, a lot of things have come to light. First of all, at last I found the reason Eddie detested me so strongly. Eddie apparently asked my mother if he might bring his mother to live with them when they first began dating. Not comfortable with the thought of them moving in together so quickly, my mother had said no. She particularly objected to the notion of his sick mother living with him. Though Eddie had made it clear that his mother had a full-time nurse to look after her, she felt that having Eddie's mother live with us would be too much effort for her and declined. Eddie needs someone around to offer emotional support solely. Not ready to move in with Eddie, my mother wanted the extra burden of having her mother-in-law live with her gone. She blamed all on me rather than being direct with Eddie. About 3 months into their relationship, which was already somewhat serious, this happened. That was my mother's decision. I didn't want to say anything even though I felt it was too soon for them to be thinking of such things. She lied to Eddie, telling him she would be cool with him moving home with his mother and kids. She said, though, that I might be trouble. Telling Eddie that I had drove away her former boyfriends as I wanted to protect her and still thought my parents may be reunited, my mother presented me as a young criminal. She said she didn't want Eddie's mother to suffer because of me and she didn't want to break my heart. She also informed Eddie I had spoken negatively of his family. She said I had vowed to make his mother's life miserable should she move in and referred to her as a useless burden. She further claimed that I spoke of his children as little evil goblins, destined to destroy our family. These are things I would never say since, for me, they are callous and utterly out of line. But Eddie thought her. He then stopped interacting with me totally since he wanted nothing to do with me. Although I had always behaved properly around him, he trusted my mother's lies. He had no reason to mistrust such allegations. I learned about all of this some many days ago. Eddie had been pushing my mother to cut relations and disown me for what I had allegedly done. She had to come clean and reveal the truth at last when she objected. Eddie was astounded to find, based on things my mother had told him, he had been mistreating me for years. She had lied since she was too terrified to tell him she was the one not wanting his sick mother to live with us. Eddie and my mother live apart these days. Eddie was shocked he had treated me so badly over something untrue. Eddie even said in an email that if my mother had simply been honest with him, he would not have had a problem. Had she told him she lacked the bandwidth to tend to a sick relative, he would have devised a plan with his sister to alternate in looking after their mother. She instead decided to lie and invented a terrible tale about me. Eddie emailed me also apologizing for what he had put me through and hoping I could pardon him. I'm still digesting how I feel, thus I haven't answered yet. Right now, I want to keep my thoughts clean and avoid obsessing over this. Eddie had been mistreating me for so long since falsehoods my mother had told him caused him to change. She let it happen since it suited her. She even gave him tales about how I was running afoul of rules at the institution. He trusted her totally, hence he never even questioned it. We never communicated, thus he never knew that I was really a regular man, which prevented the exposure of my mother's lies. I have to admit, she is one twisted person. Knowing all of this, my father is now seeking full custody. Claiming she loved us and wanted us to be a happy family, my mother is depressed. But I'm sorry. Wrecking everyone else's life does not allow you to have a content family on your own terms. Update 2. Eddie is apparently seeking divorce in addition to my dad seeking complete custody. My mother wrote my dad a lot of texts pleading him to talk to Eddie and mend things since she can't live without all of us. I wonder how she even expects us to listen to her after all she did. Knowing full well that she had been lying about me to her husband, she made sure I was treated badly and didn't have any issues for so many years. I wish that nobody ever suffers something like this at the hands of their own mother. She merely cared about herself and nothing else, yet I continued wondering what I did wrong and why I was despised by her husband and his family for no reason. I have blocked her everywhere and desire never to interact with her ever once more. I loved her and wanted her to be happy, so over the past few years I put up so much. She obviously just gave her personal happiness first priority and felt different about her own son. That renders two of us who gave her happiness top priority. Well, not anymore. Update 3. Eddie has formally asked for divorce. Right now, that is absolutely all anyone in my family or among the mutual friends of my parents is talking about. My mother is handling this in a very unusual manner by sharing depressing remarks on social media, screenshots of which I constantly getting from my cousins. Though I'm not sure what she expects, that is most certainly not going to help. She dug her tomb. Now she had to lie in it. Update 4. My dad owns me entirely right now. After a few months, my mother fought valiantly, but the divorce and all the evidence of what she went through made things extremely difficult for her. She truly had no chance since we had all the evidence required, even though her attorney stretched the matter out for a few months. Nevertheless, since my dad is the custodial parent, I no longer have to see my mother if I so wish not to see her. She does have visitation rights, but I'm not sure why that would be relevant given I no longer wish to interact with her. Living with my father makes me pleased. Everything is going rather nicely. I'm excited to move on. I've even made plans with friends. Now to the next story 7. My parents demanded I give my welcome party dress to my sister, who always destroys my things. Am I the asshole for finally telling the truth? I, 22F, severely need help about a matter involving my family, notably my sister Susan, 24F. I've been a long-time lurker, but recent circumstances have compelled me to finally share my tale. Please bear with me as this may be a bit long. I'm actually shivering as I type this, partially out of rage and partly out of dread of what will happen if they find out I'm asking for help. I recently graduated from college and got my dream job at a top technology business. Everything was going well. I worked hard in college, maintaining a 3.9 GPA with a partial scholarship, and securing this position after numerous rounds of competitive interviews. The organization is well known for its positive work environment and ample prospects for advancement. After years of walking on eggshells at home, I was truly pleased to begin my working life. The welcome reception for new staff is tomorrow evening. It's a formal function where new employees can meet top management and team leaders. Several VIPs will be there, and it is recognized to be an important networking event that can impact your future career path inside the organization. I worked part-time for months and saved up enough money to buy appropriate attire. It is not ostentatious, but rather professional and stylish. It cost me $400, which equates to numerous hours of tutoring and weekend shifts at a nearby cafe. My parents, both 45, didn't contribute anything, which was not surprising given their history of preferring my sister. My sister Susan has always been the golden child. She is currently unemployed after failing to complete college twice. She spends the majority of her time partying and posting on social media, while our parents cover her expenses without question. They've spent thousands on her shopping sprees, expensive devices, and even a car, which she crashed within 3 months. Meanwhile, since high school, I've had to work part-time jobs to cover basic expenses such as school supplies and clothing. The inequality in treatment began early. When I was 5, my aunt gave me a tiny art set for Christmas. Susan threw a violent rage, so my parents took it away and handed it to her, despite the fact that she had previously received other expensive gifts. They told me I needed to learn to share, that Susan was more sensitive. This set the tone for our entire life. Growing up, Susan would frequently throw temper tantrums if I received something pleasant. When I was 12, I won a science competition at school. Instead of celebrating, Susan had a meltdown because she wasn't getting enough attention. What is my parents' solution? They took away my prize and certificate to avoid causing Susan concern. Susan couldn't stand seeing me on stage, so they forced me to miss the award ceremony. This pattern persisted throughout my life. Any accomplishment or enjoyment of mine was viewed as a danger to Susan's well-being. As we became older, the situation worsened. Susan had a habit of removing my belongings without permission. Clothes, books, electronics, nothing was off limits. If I protested, my parents would chastise me for being selfish and insensitive to my sister's sentiments. They would remark things like, "Susan is sensitive and requires additional support. You're stronger, so you must compromise." When I acquired my first smartphone at 16, which I paid for my tutoring money, Susan demanded it because hers was outdated, despite the fact that it was only 6 months old. My folks made me swap phones with her. There were numerous occurrences like this. Susan would physically assault me if she didn't get her way. She once pushed me down the stairs when I refused to allow her to use my laptop for a social media broadcast. I sprained my ankle, but my parents did not take me to the hospital. Instead, they instructed me to remain in my room and not provoke Susan further. Another time, Mom slapped me in the face at a family gathering because I was getting more compliments on my academic achievements. My parents called me aside and chastised me for showing off and making Susan unhappy. The emotional assault was far more severe than the physical. Susan would frequently tell me that I was unwanted and that our parents had me solely to give her a sibling. She made fun of my appearance, circulated rumors about me at school, and even ruined my friendships. When I was 15, I had my first boyfriend. Susan claimed I was cheating on him, I wasn't, and even showed him modified screenshots of phony chats. He broke up with me, and when I confronted Susan, she simply laughed. Our parents? They say I should never have begun dating since it made Susan lonely. Throughout all of this, I learned to keep my head down and concentrate on my schoolwork. My dream of financial independence kept me going during the toughest moments. I stopped expecting support or validation from my family. I even intended to move out as soon as I started earning money, hoping to finally be free of this toxic environment. I immersed myself in schoolwork and extracurricular activities, doing everything I could to avoid being at home. During college, I believed things would improve because I was living in the dorms, but Susan would frequently drop up unexpectedly, demand money or clothes, and throw fits if I refused. My parents would call and chastise me for neglecting my sister, despite the fact that she was meant to be the older sibling. They even tried to force me to quit out after Susan failed her classes for the second time, stating that it was unfair for me to complete my education while she couldn't. But yesterday, everything came to a head. Susan and our parents stormed into my room 1 hour before I was supposed to try on my dress for final changes. She demanded that I dress for her next job interview. When I declined, she screamed about how I was arrogant for having a job before her, how I was purposefully attempting to make her appear bad, and how I'd always been a selfish, attention-seeking brat. Our parents, obviously, supported her. "Your sister needs this more than you," Mom remarked, using the guilt-tripping tone I've come to despise. "She has interviews scheduled, and this garment would greatly increase her confidence. You can wear something else to the celebration. Why are you always so difficult?" I tried to explain how important this event was to my career, how I had saved for months to buy the outfit, and how this was my last chance to make a good first impression at my new job. But Dad cut me off, his face flushed with rage. "Stop being so difficult," he snapped. "You understand how difficult this time has been for Susan. Why do you always have to make it about yourself? Can't you think about your sister's emotions for once?" What is the worst part? Susan had previously returned her own beautiful dress, purchased by our parents for $2,000, and used the money to buy makeup and a new iPhone cover. She didn't even have any actual interviews arranged. She only wanted my dress because it was mine. Later, I overheard her on the phone with a friend, joking about how she was going to take care of her sister's attitude issues. What distinguishes this situation from prior ones is that my grandmother, 71F, expects images from the welcome celebration. She's always been more sensible than my parents, but living in another state means she's not as familiar with our family dynamics. She explicitly requested that I send her images of my clothing, expressing her pride that I had landed such a good position right out of college. She even considered framing the photo for her homeroom. I am currently locked in my room, trying to figure out what to do. My hands are trembling while I type this. My sister is still having a fit outside, yelling that I am ruining her life and that she will make me regret being born. I can hear her hammering on my door and threatening to smash it down. My parents are texting me to stop being selfish and to think about family harmony. They're threatening to ground me, yes, at 22, and confiscate my phone if I don't cooperate. Should I just give in again to maintain the peace? I am aware that if I do not comply, they may physically compel me to hand over the dress, or Susan may trash it out of spite, as she has done with my belongings in the past. But I'm so tired of being the family's scapegoat. This welcoming celebration meant the world to me. It's my first step toward independence, a chance to begin establishing a life free of their destructive influence. I can't help but worry if telling my grandmother the truth about what's going on will make a difference. She's always been nice to me, but my parents have taught me that contacting relatives would bring shame to the family and that no one would believe me anyhow. They have spent years telling me that their treatment is normal and that I am to blame for not being more flexible. I am lost and unsure what to do. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Am I irrational in wanting to keep my own outfit, which I purchased with my own money? How do I approach this scenario without causing further controversy, but also without giving up something that is really important to me? I feel like I'm having a panic attack just thinking about approaching them. The welcoming celebration is tomorrow evening, so I have to make a decision fast. I've worked so hard to get here, and it's upsetting that my accomplishment is being overshadowed by my sister's demands and my parents' supporting conduct. The idea of showing up in something inappropriate and perhaps harming my professional reputation is worrisome. But so is the prospect of another violent encounter with Susan. Thank you for reading this far. I've never told anyone the whole amount of what goes on in our family, so writing it all down seems both terrifying and liberating. I keep second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm overreacting or if I'm insane for believing this isn't typical. Right now, any advice or assistance would be greatly appreciated. Update 1. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who left positive comments on my first post. A lot has transpired in the past 24 hours, and everything has altered. Yesterday, after I posted, my grandmother called to inquire about the welcome celebration and pictures. When I started making excuses, she realized something was wrong. She insisted on bringing me up for lunch today, claiming to require assistance with grocery shopping. My parents couldn't turn her down without raising suspicions. At a quiet cafe away from home, my grandma held my hands and whispered, "Now, tell me everything." Her gentle tone smashed through all of my barricades. For the first time, I revealed the entire truth about our family dynamics. I told her how Susan ruined my school projects, shredded my college prep books, and bleached my prom outfit. I revealed years of secrets that I had kept buried out of fear and shame. My grandma listened without interrupting, but I could see her hands trembling in rage. When I concluded, she confessed that she and other relatives had suspected difficulties for years but had been unable to prove them because my parents always presented a perfect family picture at gatherings. Right there at the cafe, Mother began calling family members, including my aunts, uncles, and family acquaintances. As she made these calls, my phone started vibrating nonstop with texts from my family. My mother sent more anxious texts. "How can you tell lies about our family after everything we've done for you? You're making your sister cry again." Susan's communications began with a guilt trip. "I cannot believe you would do this to me. You know how sensitive I am." They swiftly moved to threats. "You better tell Grandma you lied, or I'll make you regret it. Remember your prom dress? This will be worse." Dad joined in. "Your mother is having a breakdown because of you. Come home right now and mend the mess you've made." But this time, their threats had a different effect on me. Each message proved what I had told my granny. While they were making these threats, my grandma showed me scores of encouraging texts from family members who were finally realizing the truth. The family has responded overwhelmingly. My aunt apologized for believing Susan's falsehoods about how cruel I was to her. My uncle promised to help me find an apartment close to my workplace. Another aunt recommended therapy and even offered to cover the fees. My grandmother made it clear that she will not allow them to scare me longer. She contacted her lawyer and purchased me a new outfit for the welcome celebration, which is now safely stored at my aunt's house. Even family friends have begun to share their observations of Susan's troubling behavior at gatherings, including a child psychologist who had observed warning flags years ago. I am writing this from my aunt's place. My parents are still sending me texts threatening to cut me off financially, which is immaterial because I support myself, and telling everyone what a bad daughter I am. Susan's latest threat was to ruin my job, but it no longer scares me. For the first time, I am not facing their assault alone. Tomorrow, I'll go to the welcome reception in my new dress, with my aunt driving me there for safety. My grandma instructed me to chronicle everything from now on, including Susan's threats. Thank you, Reddit, for letting me see that what I've normalized isn't typical at all. I'll post another update when I can. Update 2. I never anticipated things to escalate so soon following my last update. I'm writing this from my grandmother's house, with a broken nose and confused feelings about what's transpired. The day following my welcome celebration, my grandmother surprised me with a new MacBook for work. She had it transported to my aunt's place first, knowing Susan's track record with my belongings. When I returned home to pack some clothing, I assumed my parents and Susan would be gone. I was mistaken. Susan waited in my room. She'd learned about the laptop via social media, where my cousin had posted a congratulations message about my new job and mentioned the gift. What occurred next still seems strange. "So you're taking bribes from Grandma now?" Susan sat on my bed, browsing through her phone, her voice strangely quiet. "Do you think you can turn the entire family against us?" I tried to hastily get some clothing and leave, but she was blocking the door. "Do you remember when we were kids and Mom always said that sharing is caring?" She smiled, but her eyes remained icy. "Grandma also needs to learn that lesson. Hand over the laptop." When I declined, stating that I needed it for my new job, she pulled my hair and banged my face against the doorframe. I heard a crack and felt warm blood rush out of my nose. The agony was excruciating, but what hurt worse was hearing my parents' reaction. When they heard the ruckus, they came upstairs, but instead of assisting me, Mom began yelling at me for provoking Susan. Dad simply stood there, saying I should have known better than to flaunt my new gift in front of my sister. Fortunately, my aunt insisted on waiting outside in her car. When she heard the shouting, she entered and discovered me bleeding. What followed was like a scene from a movie. My aunt phoned both the police and my grandmother. Within an hour, my grandma came, along with 2 additional aunts and an uncle. The cops gathered accounts and photos of my injuries. Susan kept changing her tale, first saying it was an accident, then that I had assaulted her first, and ultimately breaking down and yelling that I deserved it for stealing her family. The most shocking development was not the police involvement, but the community response. While I was in the hospital getting my nose treated, word went throughout our extended family and social networks. My parents' carefully cultivated picture of the ideal family broke totally. Their country club membership was quietly cancelled. Mom's club barred her from their weekly sessions. Dad's golf mates were suddenly too busy to play. Susan's few remaining acquaintances began relaying anecdotes about her violent outbursts that they had witnessed over time. My parents suffered greatly from social isolation. They'd spent years promoting their image as ideal parents with 2 daughters, the sensitive artist Susan and the difficult one, me. Everyone now knows the truth, and they are unable to handle it. They've been calling relatives non-stop in an effort to minimize the harm. Their latest claim is that I'm having a mental breakdown and fabricating stories about Susan. But nobody believes it anymore, especially after the police report. Susan's attitude to the social ramifications has been especially worrying. She set up several social media identities to harass me and disseminate misinformation about our family situation. She even came up to my office, attempting to convince my new coworkers that I am unstable. Fortunately, my manager was aware of the issue through my uncle, who works in human resources, and had security take her away. My grandmother's lawyer assisted me in filing for a restraining order against Susan. The proof was overwhelming: years of documented events, witness accounts from family and friends, and now police photos of my injuries. I'm currently residing at my grandmother's house, and the difference with my previous existence is startling. Nobody here advises me to stop provoking my sister. Nobody insists that I give up my possessions in order to keep the peace. I can leave my laptop on my desk without worry of it disappearing. My extended family's support continues to astound me. Cousins I haven't spoken with in years have reached out to share their impressions about Susan's behavior at family gatherings. My aunt's acquaintance, a therapist, helped me comprehend that what I was going through was continuous abuse enabled by my parents. Meanwhile, my parents' social circle is diminishing. Their neighbors no longer stop and speak. Mom's social media posts about praying for her troubled daughters are received with silence or harsh criticism. Dad's business associates have begun to distance themselves, concerned about his judgment after learning how he handled the family problem. Susan's work prospects, which were previously poor, have become virtually non-existent. In our society, word spreads quickly, and her violent outburst is now widely known. She blames me for wrecking her life, but more people recognize her threats for what they are. I am still absorbing all that has transpired. My nose will heal, but witnessing my parents' carefully constructed facade disintegrate has been both satisfying and heartbreaking. They are dealing with the natural consequences of their decisions, and no amount of trickery will help them this time. I'll provide another update as I have more information to offer. Thank you everybody for your encouragement. It helped me hold firm when Susan requested the laptop, even though the repercussions were unpleasant. Sometimes things have to get worse before they can improve. Update number 3. Thank you for your support on my prior updates. It's been a hectic few days, and I wanted to highlight some important developments. My healing is progressing well. The swelling in my nose has subsided, but the bruise appears worse. The doctor thinks there will be no permanent harm, which is reassuring given my future work presentations. Living at my grandmother's house has become permanent, and the contrast with my previous existence is stark. This morning, I unintentionally spilled a coffee mug and found myself flinching, expecting screams and punishment. Instead, I received my grandmother's polite concern and assistance cleaning up. The community's response has been incredible. Mom's social media presence collapsed when a prayer request post about her troubled daughters backfired. Susan's previous students swarmed the comments section with their own accounts of her bullying and violence. Dad's business has suffered a big blow. Several long-term clients have gone, and his partners convened an emergency meeting to evaluate his situation after discovering his participation in facilitating Susan's actions. They are especially concerned about his judgment in leadership roles. Susan has been on a downward spiral since the restraining order. She set up other phony profiles to harass me and my supporters, but unintentionally posted from her main account, providing additional proof for the court case. My aunt made a stunning revelation. My parents had frequently refused to allow Susan to get psychological care when she was younger. They were more concerned with preserving their ideal family image than with resolving the real challenges. My parents' attempts to regain control backfired spectacularly. Their family meal to clear the air was only attended by 2 distant relatives. Mom's best friend publicly unfriended her after viewing the police report images. Dad was asked to step down from church leadership, and Mom's gardening group decided to continue without her. The most affirming moment occurred when my high school counselor contacted me, apologizing for not doing more when she recognized indicators of abuse years ago. My parents had persuaded her that my reclusive conduct was teenage rebellion, and Susan's violence was artistic temperament. My workplace has been quite supportive following Susan's attempt to make trouble. My manager added additional security precautions, and my coworkers have been understanding of my predicament. My uncle published a public post yesterday, documenting years of disturbing behavior he had witnessed. His post went viral in our neighborhood, resulting in additional social ramifications. My parents' reputation in the area has shattered. Mom was ousted from the Homeowners Association board, and they can't go shopping without being followed by murmurs and glances. Susan's victim narrative is failing. She had a meltdown at our aunt's church when someone mentioned my name, confirming what everyone had heard about her conduct. I'm still adjusting to living without constant fear. My grandma enrolled me in therapy, which has helped me appreciate how unusual my home life was. Our lawyer's response to my parents' latest cease and desist letter regarding spreading falsehoods included police report images and witness statements. The help from this community has been tremendous. You made me realize that I wasn't insane for believing my situation was unusual. I'll publish a final update after everything has settled down, but for now, I'm focusing on recuperating and starting a new life. It's incredible how much energy you have when you're not always walking on eggshells. Update number 4. It has been 6 months since my previous update, and I believe it is finally time to conclude this chapter of my life. Thank you to everyone who has followed my journey and provided support. I'm presently prospering in my profession, having recently received my first promotion for leading a successful project. My team leader applauded my attention to detail and calm attitude to crisis management, skills I honed while navigating my family's chaos for years. My personal life has changed completely. I've moved into my own place, but I still see my grandmother on a daily basis. The first night in my new place, I realized I could put my possessions anywhere without fear of being stolen or destroyed. Simple things, such as having my own space and making decisions without concern, feel like valuable gifts. Susan was recently diagnosed with a number of mental health issues after being compelled to undergo evaluation as part of an anger management program. She is currently in a specialist treatment facility, not by choice, but as a condition of her probation following another violent event that did not involve me. My parents have faced serious penalties. Dad's firm encouraged him to retire early after big clients expressed worries about his judgment. Mom has become a social outcast in their neighborhood. Their attempts to join a new religious congregation were thwarted when members of their previous church revealed their background. They're selling their home and moving to another state for a fresh start, but their reputation precedes them in various areas they've investigated. The continual chilly shoulders and whispered remarks became too much for them. The most unexpected development has been the ripple effect among our extended family. My tale inspired 2 cousins to speak out about their own experiences with family abuse. It's as if breaking the veil of silence has enabled others to finally recognize their own hardships. Work has become my haven. I just created a support system for new employees, and my manager applauded my unique perspective on building friendly settings. The irony is not lost on me that my previous difficulties have become a source of professional strength. My parents made one more attempt at reconciliation last month, sending a beautifully worded letter through their new lawyer recommending family therapy. My grandmother's lawyer simply said, "All communication must go through legal channels, and I am not interested in reconciliation." The greatest rewarding shift has been in my interactions with my extended relatives. Sunday dinners at my grandmother's place have become a ritual, full of real laughter and joy. My aunts and uncles tell me things from my childhood that my parents twisted or kept buried, allowing me to regain some of my heritage. I've begun mentoring at a local youth center, working with teenagers from challenging home backgrounds. One girl just informed me that my tale inspired her to come up about her own sister's abuse. My grandma has been my biggest supporter, demonstrating what genuine family love looks like, unconditional but with appropriate boundaries. Susan's restraining order is now permanent, and she is legally prohibited from approaching my employment or apartment. The community's response has served as a lesson in social fairness. My parents and Susan faced no legal consequences other than the restraining order, but the social isolation and loss of status were more effective than any court sentence. I'm finally creating the life I've always wanted but never thought possible. I have a successful career, a supportive social circle, and, most importantly, peace of mind. I no longer react to sudden noises or apologize for my existence. This will be my last update. To anyone in a similar situation, it is never too late to speak up and reclaim their life. Sometimes the most difficult step is believing you deserve better. Now to the next story 8. My wife forgot our anniversary, so I didn't pick her up at the airport. Am I the asshole for not forgiving her despite her later apology? My wife forgot our anniversary, so I decided not to pick her up at the airport. I am a 23-year-old male married to Sarah, 25. We've been together for 5 years, and I'm reaching a breaking point. Let me set the stage. It's our 5th wedding anniversary. You'd think that after 5 years of marriage, some recognition of the milestone would be expected, right? I had been dropping hints for weeks, saying things like, "I can't believe we've been married for 5 years," or, "Do you think we'll do anything special for our anniversary this year?" She responded distractedly, as I expected given her hectic schedule. Then the day arrived, and everything went as usual. She didn't say anything. There were no flowers, no meal, and no mention of our anniversary. I mean, I had gone all out every year before, organizing surprise dinners, writing meaningful messages, and sending thoughtful gifts. But over the past few years, it seemed like I was the only one making an attempt. So I brought it up. I said something like, "Hey, I suppose we aren't celebrating today?" She just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, we'll do something later. Don't worry." But later never arrived. The day went without her realizing it. I felt hurt and irritated. I've put so much into this marriage, and now here I am, feeling forgotten on our anniversary. Then things began to spiral. She had a business trip arranged for the same week, departing on the 14th and returning the following evening. She asked me to bring her up from the airport, as usual. At first, I hesitated. I had been giving passive-aggressive indications about my feelings, but she didn't appear to notice. Instead, she kept making jokes about how weary she was from the trip and how excited she was to be home, without mentioning the anniversary. It was all about work, and everything seemed okay. Frustration built up. I had been doing all the emotional work, making every special occasion memorable, while she was constantly distracted or preoccupied. That night, after lying awake for several hours, I made a decision. I was not going to pick her up at the airport. I wasn't about to reward her contempt for me. Maybe if I stopped being so accommodating, she'd realize how much she took me for granted. I did not text her, call her, or do anything. When she gave me the normal message with her flight information, time, gate, and ETA, I didn't answer. I did not even acknowledge it. It felt empowering to simply not care, even if only for a moment. I spent the day doing my own thing, treating myself as I deserved, with no regard for Sarah's flight or her return. Around 8 p.m., I began receiving texts from her, one after the other. She started phoning over and over. I simply ignored it. A part of me felt bad, but the majority of me felt strangely satisfied. Sarah was stranded at the airport with no one to pick her up, and I wasn't going to be the dutiful husband anymore. She could figure things out. Finally, about an hour later, after ignoring her calls for what seemed like an eternity, I texted her. "Oh, sorry. I completely forgot you needed a ride. This happens from time to time. I confess it was a touch petty, and I'm not proud of it. But, after 5 years of always putting her needs first, I finally broke." The remarks were almost too sweet, full of irony. I knew it would enrage her, and that's exactly what occurred. The next text I received was a series of heated rants, calling me selfish and reckless. She went on about how I was overreacting and being childish. I didn't care. The following several hours were a haze. She eventually found her way home, and as she came through the door, there was a chill in the air. She scarcely acknowledged me. She was still angry and sulking, and I didn't care anymore. I went to bed early that night and left her to her thoughts. The following day was no better. Sarah did not even apologize. She made the same old excuse about work being stressful, claiming she had just lost track of things. But I wouldn't have it. I wasn't going to let her brush everything under the rug anymore. I wanted her to admit she had messed up. I wanted her to understand what she'd done. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the sense that nothing would change. So I let her be angry. And me? I felt an odd combination of remorse and delight. I have no idea where this will lead, but I know I can't go back to the way things were. Something has to give. Update number 1. After I texted Sarah about forgetting to take her up, I didn't hear from her for a while. But, oh, when I did, it was not pretty. She started texting and calling repeatedly. I ignored each one. Part of me wanted to just let her stew, but I kept my phone on silent, and hours passed. I wasn't going to rush to pick up the pieces because she was the one who had ignored me for so long. It wasn't until after 10 p.m., I eventually surrendered and checked my phone. I had missed perhaps 15 calls and at least 20 texts. Most of them consisted of her calling me petty, reckless, and juvenile. She was infuriated. The most memorable text was one that read, "You really had to leave me stranded? Is this how you treat me after all I've done for you?" I wasn't going to fall into that guilt trip. Instead, I said quietly, "Maybe now you know what it feels like to be forgotten." I didn't say anything else. I knew any additional explanation would be lost on her. Sarah attempted to defend herself as best she could. Her response was classic. "I apologize, okay? But I've been occupied with work. I did not mean to forget the anniversary. You know how hectic things have been recently." It was the usual excuse she had always used. Job stress. But this time, it wasn't going to work. I did not respond right away. I just let the silence linger between us. After a while, she got the hint. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized how deeply she'd been affected by the entire affair. Sarah waited at the airport for more than 3 hours. Apparently, she tried to phone me every half hour throughout that time. She couldn't catch a cab soon away because she didn't want to spend money on it. She eventually gave up and hired a cab, but by the time she arrived home, it was already past midnight. When she came through the door, I didn't welcome her or make small conversation. She did not even look at me. She simply went past me, dropping her suitcase on the floor. It was obvious that she was still irritated. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. She tried to talk, but it was more of a monologue about how unfair I was. "I worked hard, and this is how you treated me?" she inquired, her voice filled with frustration. But the excuses were no longer effective for me. I wasn't interested in hearing about how difficult her job was when I felt like I'd been carrying this relationship alone for months. The first night back was horrible. We did not converse much. The only time she looked at me was while I was preparing for bed. I could feel her stare at me, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I was not going to make the first move. The next day, Sarah tried to make things right by texting me and stating, "I've been working so hard lately, it simply slipped my mind." You know how it goes. Same old narrative, same lame excuse. At this point, it was clear she didn't get it. We scarcely communicated for the following 2 days. Every time we did it, she seemed to be walking on eggshells. She was passive-aggressive, and I was not about to back down either. I had made my point, and I was not going to let her convince me that everything was all right just because she offered a few meaningless apologies. It didn't help that her father became involved. He called to ask why Sarah had to take a cab home. He was concerned, of course, but it seemed like he was trying to guilt-trip me. "I can't believe you left her there," he said. "She's been working so hard, and you just let her figure it out on her own." I had no idea how to answer, so I didn't. I let the call finish and walked away. Later that evening, Sarah made an effort to apologize, but it was not real. It felt forced, as if she was saying sorry simply to relieve the tension. "I guess I could have done better, but you didn't have to leave me stranded," she replied. There was no true accountability, no understanding of why I was furious in the first place, only another deflection. I wasn't going to accept a half-hearted apology. I told her, "I'll get past this if you can acknowledge how I feel and start being more considerate. It's not only about the anniversary. It's about how you treat me overall." How did she respond? She accused me of overreacting. She claimed I was overreacting to the situation, but I refused to back down. After a few more days of stillness and tension, I decided to establish some boundaries. I wanted space to focus on myself, so I resumed my own activities. It was a comfort not to have to continuously attend to her moods. Sarah wasn't delighted with this, but she made one more effort to make things right. She made a dinner reservation for the two of us, stating it was to compensate for something. I wasn't sure if she truly believed it would heal things or if it was a last-ditch effort to escape true responsibilities. Regardless, I wasn't sure if it was enough. I was still waiting to see if she was truly going to change. Is this a serious attempt, or just another temporary fix that will come apart in a few weeks? Update number 2. Following the airport incident, Sarah determined to attempt to set things right. She made a dinner reservation at a restaurant, claiming it was to make amends for everything that had occurred. I won't lie, part of me was cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was the moment she realized how much she had hurt me and decided to make an effort. But, as usual, this was not the case. Sarah texted me at midday on the day of the dinner to inform me that the reservation had been made for 7 p.m. I didn't sense any enthusiasm, I was simply going through the motions. Perhaps it was the fact that this wasn't our first attempt to settle things, or it was the nagging feeling in my gut that this supper would make no difference. Still, I got ready and decided to give it a shot. At least for one night, everything might be different. We got at the restaurant, and to my surprise, it wasn't as nice and private as I had imagined. Instead, it was a basic chain restaurant, the kind you go to for casual evenings when you don't want to put in too much effort. It wasn't even a place I enjoyed. I'd previously stated that I didn't like such types of places, but Sarah had chosen them regardless. I tried not to let it affect me, but it was difficult to ignore the lack of effort. It felt like she had chosen the easiest option, as if she couldn't be bothered to think about what I would want. The conversation began awkwardly. Sarah immediately began discussing how hard her job had been, going on and on about deadlines, meetings, and the amount of strain she was under. She didn't even recognize that she had missed our anniversary or left me stranded in the airport. Instead, she simply kept chatting about work. She said something about doing her best and being stressed out, but I couldn't help but think she was entirely missing the point. She had not apologized for the anniversary. She had not apologized for making me feel totally invisible. The more she discussed work, the more frustrated I felt. It wasn't simply that she was disregarding the larger issue, she didn't appear to comprehend how deeply her actions had hurt me. And it struck me harder than ever. In that moment, I recognized that this was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. We were sitting there trying to have a great supper, but all I could think about was how disconnected she was from what was truly important. She didn't seem to get why I was wounded. It wasn't only about the anniversary. It was not only about the airport. It was about all the tiny things she had overlooked over the years, like the birthday surprises I arranged alone. She was too busy during the holidays, so we spent them apart. Our small conversation didn't last long, and things began to unravel. We had a minor quarrel about the food, but as often, it escalated into something more. She became defensive, arguing that I was being very picky and ungrateful. I attempted to clarify that it was not about the meal or the restaurant, but about everything else. That's when everything started to spill out. I told her how I felt ignored, and how she never seemed to put any effort into our relationship. I mentioned the anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet nights where I felt like a supporting figure in her life. Sarah, however, deflected rather than accepting responsibility. She began talking about how nobody's perfect, and how I should simply accept what I had. And there it was, the excuse I'd grown tired of hearing. Nobody's perfect. It was the mantra she usually said when things got tough, and this time was no exception. When the waiter came by to see if we needed anything else, I simply stared at Sarah. Her countenance was blank, and it was evident she was no longer listening. She made a token effort, offering me a small box of chocolates with a half-hearted smile. "Here," she answered. "This is for you. Sorry for everything, it was a lovely gesture, I suppose, but it felt insincere, a last-ditch effort to make things right without actually addressing the larger issues between us." I did not even want the chocolates. I was past the point of making little gestures. I needed something authentic. The remainder of the dinner was quiet, unpleasant, and full of meaningless platitudes. We scarcely chatted on the way home. I felt the strain in the car. Sarah was still unhappy, but I couldn't tell if she was upset with me for calling her out or with herself for not understanding why I was upset in the first place. It did not matter. Regardless, the silence was deafening. When we returned home, I couldn't shake the impression that nothing had changed. I thought that this time she'd understand. That it wasn't about the little things, but about the broader picture. But my hopes were dashed when I looked at her and realized she still didn't see it. Sarah began completing minor household chores over the next 3 days. She washed the dishes, helped with the laundry, and cleaned up. At first, I assumed this was a sign that she was attempting to change. However, it felt more like damage control than anything else. She wasn't doing these things because she truly wanted to, she was doing them because she knew I was furious and wanted to avoid a confrontation. I noticed myself emotionally distancing more and more. I couldn't help it. I did not want to keep being disappointed. I didn't want to keep waiting for her to change when it appeared she wasn't trying. I didn't want to fix someone who refused to meet me halfway. A friend of mine advised I provide Sarah an ultimatum. Either she changes, or you walk away, he replied. It seems harsh, but perhaps it was the wake-up call she needed. I couldn't keep on like this, always wondering if she was going to make a genuine effort. Sarah's excuses piled up over time: work stress, deadlines. They were always her explanations for everything. I was beginning to notice a larger problem. Sarah didn't seem to realize the developing emotional distance between us. She assumed that performing the bare minimum would suffice, but I realized that wasn't the case anymore. I began to ponder about our future together. Was this relationship salvageable? I had no idea anymore. Update 3. After weeks of dealing with the same cycle, empty apologies, half-hearted attempts at change, and more excuses, I had reached my breaking point. I could not go on like this any longer. I had tried to be patient and give her opportunities to step up, but it was evident that Sarah didn't grasp it. So I decided to sit down with her and have the chat we should have had months ago. It was not easy. I'd been putting it off, hoping she'd figure it out on her own, but that wasn't happening. When she returned home from work one evening, I informed her that we needed to discuss. There was no way around this one. We sat in the living room, and I could immediately feel the tension rising. I didn't want to yell, but I couldn't hide my feelings any longer. I began by telling Sarah, I can't do this anymore. This relationship has been one-sided for far too long. You've disregarded me, forgotten critical events, and never accepted responsibility for any of it. She only glanced at me, bewildered. What are you talking about? She asked. I've been working so hard, and you're acting like I'm doing nothing. I took a deep breath and tried to remain cool. It is not about your work, Sarah. It's about how you treated me. The anniversary. The airport incident. I've tried to make this relationship work for both of us, but you haven't even attempted to meet me halfway. Sarah instantly went on the defensive, as she usually does. You're blowing things out of proportion, she continued, her voice rising. You're acting like I forgot your anniversary on purpose. I didn't mean to forget, okay? I've been stressed out with work. Sarah responded with defiance. I was not buying it. It isn't only the anniversary, Sarah. It is everything. It's every time you make me feel unimportant. Every birthday and holiday passes, and I'm the only one who makes an attempt. Sarah's face stiffened. I am not perfect, okay? Nobody is perfect. Maybe you're just too demanding. I do what I can. She placed the responsibility back on me. Perhaps you expect too much of me. Her statement made me even enraged. I am not looking for perfection, Sarah. I am asking for basic consideration. I am seeking for respect. I'm asking you to care about our relationship in the same way that I do. But you don't, and that's what really hurts. The room fell silent for a minute. I could see Sarah wasn't expecting this type of discourse. She squirmed uneasily in her seat, obviously unsure how to answer. I guess I could have done better, she said, but it was clear she didn't truly believe it. She didn't really accept responsibility for anything. She wasn't even apologetic. She was simply stating what she needed to say. I'm not interested in hearing you say you could have done better, I stated calmly. I need more than that. I need to know you understand it. I need to know you understand how much your negligence has harmed me, and I need you to demonstrate that you are prepared to make an attempt. Sarah avoided staring at me. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but I was not done. I had one final point to make. How would you feel if the roles were reversed, Sarah? How would you feel if I forgot about our anniversary and left you at the airport? For the first time in the conversation, she was silent. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. I could see the wheels moving in her thoughts, and for a brief time, it appeared that the truth had finally been accepted. She didn't say anything for quite some time, and I let the stillness hang in the air. Finally, Sarah broke the pause with a low, I'm not sure. I suppose I'd be pissed. I nodded. Exactly. That is how I feel. That is how I have felt for a long time. I proposed something simple. Couples activities such as frequent date nights or simply spending time together to restore the connection we once had. I wanted to see if she was truly willing to put up the effort to alter things. We can try it, but it will require work from both of us. I can't keep carrying this relationship by myself, I admitted. Sarah stared at me and hesitated for a second. Okay, I'll try, she answered, but her tone was flat, as if she was simply repeating what she thought I wanted to hear. I'm not sure whether date nights will solve anything, but I'll try. That was the lackluster response I expected. It felt more like a responsibility than a commitment. I knew I had to wait a few weeks to see whether anything would change. I couldn't simply accept her word for it. The conversation concluded on a tense note. Sarah did not appear convinced, and neither did I. We went to bed without saying anything more, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept wondering if Sarah's statements were sincere or if she was just saying anything to get me off her back. I chose to give it time, but I knew I couldn't wait forever. I had already invested so much in this relationship, and I wasn't sure how much more I could offer if nothing changed. I couldn't let myself become trapped in a cycle of disappointment and broken promises. So now I'm simply waiting to see if Sarah will make an attempt or if she'll revert to her old habits. I'm not sure what will happen, but I do know one thing: I'm not going to stick around for another false promise. Update 4. After that serious chat, things appeared to take a turn, for a time. Sarah tried harder. She actually organized a small date night for us, which included dinner at a local restaurant we both enjoyed. Nothing extravagant, but it did feel like an effort. She also began to assist around the house more, cleaning dishes without being asked, bringing out the garbage, and picking up groceries. Things appeared to be improving for about a week. I even began to wonder whether she was finally getting it. Maybe I was wrong about her. But during the second week, things began to return to normal. Sarah canceled a planned outing, claiming that work had piled up and she couldn't get away. Again, work stress was her go-to excuse. I tried to be understanding, but it was difficult not to perceive it as yet another meaningless excuse. I was frustrated. I had hoped that her efforts in the first week were meaningful, but they suddenly felt like a temporary fix. Something she did only to keep me quiet. The saddest thing was when Sarah forgot another milestone. She didn't recall the day we first met. It wasn't something big, just a minor detail that mattered to me. I mentioned it lightly, but she just shrugged it off as if it were no great deal. In that instant, I knew she was no longer trying to keep track of these things. She didn't care about the small things that used to matter to both of us. It was only me, attempting to hang on to whatever spark we had left, while she appeared to be losing interest. I began doubting everything. Did Sarah genuinely care about our marriage, or did she simply assume that I would always be there? She didn't appear to realize how much effort I was putting in, which hurt more than I'd want to admit. I wasn't sure if she still respected me or just took me for granted. One day, while cleaning up the living room, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I found Sarah's calendar stashed beneath some papers on her desk. I don't typically rummage through her belongings, but something told me to look. I noticed the date of our anniversary marked on the calendar. But here's the thing, she still forgot it. It was as if she had prepared for it, made a note of it, but then forgot about it when it finally arrived. I was quite frustrated. Later that night, I confronted her, wondering why she had marked our anniversary yet still forgot about it. She made some poor excuse about forgetting to check her calendar that week. That is what she said, as if it were an innocent mistake. It was not a mistake. It was plain negligence. When I looked at the calendar more thoroughly, I realized what had actually been prioritized. There were work obligations, sporting events, and weekend vacations with pals, but almost nothing about us. Our relationship seemed to have slipped under her notice. I had understood that work was always her top priority, but seeing it set out like that stung me harder than intended. I had tried so hard to keep things going between us, but it seemed like she couldn't be bothered. The final straw arrived a few days later. I overheard Sarah on the phone with a friend, discussing a weekend trip they were arranging for a sporting event. She was ecstatic about it, discussing the trip's specifics as if it were the greatest thing ever. I felt terrible to my stomach. This was something she had not revealed to me. She had time for a weekend excursion with her pals, but she couldn't remember even the smallest details about me. I tried to dismiss it at first, but the more I considered it, the more betrayed I felt. It wasn't simply that she prioritized her hobbies, she never thought about how I'd feel. She had plenty of time and energy for everything else, but when it came to us, I felt like an afterthought. So I stopped engaging. I stopped making an attempt. I stopped texting her throughout the day and trying to make small chat when she arrived home. I felt if she didn't notice the distance between us, she probably never would. I needed her to see what was going on. I needed her to feel how I was feeling. Eventually, our pals noticed. They were initially all on Sarah's side, claiming that I was overreacting. But eventually, they noticed it as well. Several friends contacted me, stating they understood my unhappiness and even confessed Sarah had been selfish. They told me I deserved better, and I understood I wasn't alone in seeing the reality. But nothing changed. The final blow came when Sarah canceled our scheduled dinner date to attend a last-minute gathering with her pals. She didn't even tell me in person. She sent me an apology, stating she couldn't refuse the invitation. That was it. That was when I understood I needed to make a decision. This was something I couldn't keep putting off. Sarah wouldn't change unless I forced her to. I could wait for her to figure it out, but at what cost? The longer I stayed, the more I felt like I had lost myself. I needed to stop waiting for a relationship that was unsatisfactory. Now I'm at a crossroads. I'm not sure if I have the strength to walk away, but I can't keep continuing like this. The emotional barrier has grown so far that I'm not sure how to bridge it anymore. Something needs to give. It's time for me to make a difficult decision about my marriage, one that will either force her to wake up or allow me the space I require to move on. Update 5. After everything that had happened, I felt it was time to take a step back and consider what I really wanted. I needed to decide if I wanted to keep trying in this relationship or if it was time to walk away for forever. So I chose to spend the entire weekend alone. I did not respond to Sarah's SMS or calls. I didn't even leave the house often. I needed room to think, and this time I wasn't going to allow my emotions influence my decision. During that weekend, I finally realized the reality. I had been settling for less than I deserved for quite some time. I recognized how emotionally spent I had gotten by clinging to something that no longer existed. The small things I did for Sarah, the gestures, the effort, all seemed to go unappreciated. She wasn't making an effort to make me feel respected. She was not even trying. And the worst part? Sarah didn't seem to notice anything wrong. She simply went about her normal routine, figuring everything was great. That understanding ached. I spent the entire weekend reflecting on how much I gave to this relationship and how little I received in return. I was no longer upset about the anniversary or the airport event. I was concerned about the big picture. Sarah had never really cared about putting me first. She had never seen me as a priority. When I came out of my weekend of reflection, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I was emotionally weary, and if I stayed in this relationship, I would only continue to be harmed. So I arranged one last conversation with Sarah. This was it. I was going to lay it all out and set clear boundaries for what I needed if this relationship was going to survive. I decided to wait until the following weekend to have the chat. Sarah was going to be home, and I knew it was our last chance to actually talk. I was prepared to be direct. To tell her everything I had been keeping hidden for so long. When the time arrived, I sat with Sarah in the living room. She could see something was wrong, but I don't think she expected what happened. I began by telling her that I couldn't continue in a relationship in which I felt underappreciated. I've tried to connect with you, I explained, but nothing has changed. You're always too busy, and I'm constantly making excuses for you. I can't do it anymore. Sarah appeared shocked. She couldn't believe what I was saying. She continued asking, "Why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't realize things were so horrible." It was as if she was taken aback by anything I said, but I found it difficult to feel sorry for her. How could she not have realized it? How could she not notice the impact her negligence was having on me? She instantly transferred the blame back onto me, saying, "You should have told me how you felt. I didn't realize things were this horrible. I thought everything was fine," she explained. She made it appear as if it was my fault for not being more outspoken about how miserable I was. That's when I realized she was completely out of touch with the state of our relationship. "I've tried, Sarah," I answered, trying to remain cool. "I've tried to connect with you multiple times, but you never listen. You do not take my problems seriously, and I have been left feeling alone. I can't continue doing this." Sarah did not take it well. She asked me for another opportunity. "I will change, I swear. I will put forth more effort. I will prioritize you. Please don't leave me." Her voice was imploring now, and her eyes were filled with desperation. For a brief moment, I considered backing down, but I knew I couldn't just let her keep making bogus promises. She had been doing so for years. "I'm willing to give it one last try," I told you. "But this time, things have to be different. I need you to actually show me that you can change. No more excuses. No more empty apologies." Sarah agreed, but I was not convinced. Her words were only that, words. Actions spoke louder, and I wanted to see if she would follow through on anything she said. We discussed specific things she could do to make time for us, organize more thoughtful dates, and be present while we were together. It was a modest list, but it was the beginning. The following few days saw a variety of tiny but obvious changes. Sarah began planning dates again. They weren't lavish, but they were thoughtful, and she was obviously trying. She began to be more present at home, taking the time to talk to me rather than disappearing into her phone or watching TV. It felt like a start in the right direction, but a part of me didn't believe it would endure. Several days later, Sarah surprised me with a handwritten note. She apologized for everything, realized how much I had been carrying in the relationship, and stated her commitment to making significant changes. I was shocked. This was the first time she had truly accepted responsibility for her acts, and it meant a lot to me. It was a step forward, but I was still unsure whether it would be sufficient. I began to sense a glimmer of hope, but I maintained my hard boundaries. I wasn't going to let myself slip into the same habits. I needed to see actual, long-lasting progress. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful that things would improve. But I wasn't going to base my happiness only on Sarah. That was how much I had learned. So, for now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I can control my own happiness. Whatever happens to her, if things go better, that's terrific. But if they don't, I will be prepared to walk away. The decision is now in my hands. Now to the next story. 9. I was bullied by my sister, ignored by my parents, and left home at 18. Years later, they contacted me for financial help for my sister. For years, my parents disregarded my elder sister's harsh bullying, so I moved out at the age of 18. 6 years later, they wanted us to reconcile, so they contacted me with the awful news. But it backfires on them because my older sister, Rose, was a huge bully all my life, and living with her was sometimes terrible and tough. To be honest, Rose has ADHD. Her continual hyperactivity and aggression made her a difficult person to live with, especially during our childhood. Rose was 5 years old when I was born, and her reaction to my presence was anything but welcome. She was always uncomfortable with the attention I received from our parents. It's not uncommon for older siblings to feel jealous or displaced by a new baby, but Rose's emotions were very strong. She would throw full-blown tantrums whenever my parents spent time with me, as if my very presence offended her. All I remember from my youth is my sister snatching all of my toys. She would snatch them away without hesitation. Birthdays, which should have been pleasant occasions for me, turned into mayhem. Rose would shout, cry, and stage a theatrical scene, completely overshadowing my jubilation. Instead of feeling special on my special day, I was frequently humiliated by my sister's actions. As I grew older, Rose's actions got more targeted. She began to physically lash out at me. She would sometimes shove me out of the way, even when there was no need for it. Other times, she would bite me, which felt intentionally painful and malicious. It was evident that her dislike for me was more than just a phase. She seemed to resent me for taking the spotlight and ruining the interaction she had with our parents before my arrival. Rose has never had any pals. My parents would plan playdates in an attempt to make her feel included, but those should have been fun times evolved into stressful, uncomfortable experiences. I had to continually mediate or apologize for her actions. Over the years, I couldn't help but harbor tremendous anger for my sister. I couldn't understand why she didn't behave like other people or why she couldn't manage her emotions. She also didn't seem to like me much and would frequently pick conflicts with me. Living with her was confusing and upsetting. I wished for a sister who would protect me, not one who continuously tortured me or made me feel unwanted. What made things worse was my parents' lack of concern for me. They adored Rose, and it seemed like they were completely unaware of how her bullying was impacting me. Every time I tried to express my emotions or explain how much her behavior upset me, they dismissed it. They'd explain to me that Rose was a special kid, who required my understanding and patience at all times. Even though I was younger than her, I was expected to satisfy her demands and moods, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. I remember when I turned 13. I spent days urging my parents to make it a memorable trip for just the three of us. After much appealing and arguing, they finally reached an agreement. The plan was set. Rose would spend 3 days with our grandparents, and I would finally get my moment. But when Rose found out, she had a major rage, crying uncontrollably for hours, cursing, throwing things, and even getting in my face, screaming threats that she would kill me for attempting to take our parents away from her. To be honest, seeing her rage focused at me was horrifying and overpowering. Instead of sticking up for me, my parents started begging with me to let Rose join us. They tried to argue with me, explaining that it was the only way to calm her down. I resisted at first, knowing deep down that if she came, my fantasy trip would be shattered. But, with Rose raving furiously and my parents desperate, I felt forced to give in. Once again, her actions determined the outcome, and I was forced to accommodate her. As I had anticipated, bringing Rose turned the vacation into another fiasco. From the moment we arrived at Disneyland, she refused to enjoy anything like other children. She refused to sit on any of the rides and remained close to my mother the entire time. She was continually complaining about being overwhelmed by the throng and how much she disliked everything. Her shouts and cries immediately became the focus of everyone's attention, drowning out the joy I'd been building up for weeks. Within 2 hours, Rose was pleading with my parents to take us back to the hotel, severely ruining what should have been a perfect day. In the end, my parents had to split up to make the situation more manageable. My mother drove Rose back to the hotel, and my father stayed with me so I could try to salvage what was left of the day. While I appreciated my father's efforts, the overall experience felt tainted. My birthday was not the pleasant and carefree event I had hoped for, as Rose's wants and tantrums took precedence once more. I know my parents did their best with the cards they were handed, but it was brutally clear that my sister's needs and priorities always came first. Rose wanted their attention at all times, and no matter what I did, I was always relegated to the background. While they believed they were doing the right thing by helping Rose, it frequently left me feeling invisible, as if my needs and feelings were insignificant in comparison to hers. By the time I turned 17, I had had enough of my sister's incessant bullying and my parents' constant ignorance. I began fantasizing of freedom, of finally enjoying a life unencumbered by my sister's needs or my parents' demands. I started applying to colleges, focusing on those far away from home. When my parents learned about my plans, they were furious. They did not understand, or perhaps refused to see, why I felt compelled to leave. They persuaded and virtually begged me to remain in our hometown. They argued that Rose needed me, that I was her sibling, and that it was my job to be there for her. I argued back, emphasizing that I didn't care about Rose and would continue to apply to remote institutions regardless of how they felt. My parents revealed the actual reason they wanted me to stay: their retirement plan. They intended to travel and enjoy their life while expecting me to bear full responsibility for Rose. They informed me about how they had been sacrificing their lives for years, waiting for my time to stand forward. First and foremost, I had never been consulted about my parents' long-term plans, and I had never given them any reason to assume I would be willing to accept care for my sister. Second, I had no intention of becoming her caretaker. I wasn't her dad, and it seemed unjust and absurd to expect it from me. I explained it to them as fully as I could. I also proposed alternate possibilities, such as hiring a full-time caregiver or teaching Rose to be more self-sufficient, at least for a few days at a period, so they could continue to enjoy their retirement. My mother stated that Rose would never be comfortable with a caretaker and insisted on 24-hour surveillance, which could only be provided by a family member, meaning me. My father agreed, even accusing me of being selfish for refusing to participate in their absurd idea. Their remarks stung deeply. As if that wasn't enough, my father then confessed that the entire reason they had me, their second child, was so that I might grow up and take care of Rose in the future. I froze. My thoughts whirled as the weight of that discovery fell on me. I stared at them silently, my eyes wide with disbelief. My mother instantly intervened, chastising my father for disclosing that secret and instructing him to apologize. She then tried to backtrack, stating he didn't mean it and that, of course, they loved me as well. But her comments rang hollow. The damage was done. I couldn't unhear what he said, and it was then that I realized why I'd always felt invisible in comparison to my sister. The fact that my existence had been portrayed as a solution to Rose's care, rather than as my own person with my own goals, was upsetting. My mother insisted that Rose needed care, and that as a member of the family, I had a responsibility to her. She even argued that attending college far away would not benefit my life in any way, and that staying in our community was a better alternative. Living at home, she reasoned, would save me money on rent and other bills. I understood Rose's predicament, but did that mean I didn't deserve a life of my own? Did I have to give up my future just because she existed? The thought was suffocating. I didn't say anything to my parents at the time, knowing it wouldn't change their opinions, but within, I was more determined than ever to escape. I ignored their appeals and plunged myself into my college applications, determined to avoid them. It wasn't easy, but I worked tirelessly, and my efforts eventually paid off. I eventually got into a decent enough college to make the effort worthwhile. Obviously, when I told my parents, they were outraged. They refused to let me go and did everything they could to guilt-trip me into staying. Although I was 18, I knew I still needed support to get away from my parents, so I turned to my grandparents. I contacted, appealing for their assistance. My grandma, who has always been a solid and caring presence in my life, came over right away. She helped me pack my bags and documents and offered me a place to stay with her and my grandfather till I left for college. But my parents did not stop there. They threatened to cut me off financially, refusing to cover any of my educational fees. They informed me that if I left, I would be on my own forever, and they would cut all relations with me. Even so, I refused to give in. I took out a student loan to help support my schooling. On top of that, my grandfather offered to cover some of my bills using his retirement savings. Accepting his help crushed my heart because I knew how hard he and my grandma had worked for that money. They were doing what my parents should have done, providing love, encouragement, and financial assistance. The subsequent 4 years of my life were a whirlwind of hard work and perseverance. College was tough not only academically, but also emotionally. While most of my peers had supportive parents and enough money to go out, I did not have the same luxury. Almost every day I studied as hard as I could to support myself financially. I even took on a part-time job as a server, juggling long days and late nights around my studies. Those years were difficult, but I persevered because I knew there was no other option. Meanwhile, my parents never contacted me, not once, to ask how I was doing or if I needed anything. They maintained a deafening hush. Sometimes I questioned my worth, wondering if I truly deserved to be abandoned by those who were meant to love me unconditionally. But, even then, I refused to give up, telling myself that if I kept going, I'd finally make a life for myself. After graduation, I was really fortunate to get an excellent job. It was the opportunity I had been working so hard for, and it seemed like the first true payoff for all of my years of sacrifices. With this work, I was finally able to start repaying my college loans. More importantly, I began repaying the money my grandfather had given me to help when my parents refused. He never wanted me to repay him. It was a gift of love, not a loan. But it meant a lot to me to lessen his burden and demonstrate that his trust in me was not misplaced. I maintain a close, loving relationship with my grandparents. Whenever possible, I arrange for them to pay me a visit and express my gratitude for everything they've done for me. This year, I started hearing alarming things about my sister from my grandparents. Rose's behavior appears to have worsened with time, and now that I am no longer her target, she has turned her bullying on others. She just began bullying the neighborhood youngsters. Apparently, she had been throwing water at the kids whenever they played outside and intimidating them by saying that they weren't allowed to play in her area. Unsurprisingly, the kids' parents were concerned and complained to my parents several times, urging with them to address Rose's actions and keep her away from their children. However, as usual, my parents did not take appropriate action. They expected Rose would eventually become bored and leave the youngsters alone. However, Rose maintained her shenanigans, and the situation erupted when one of the parents, fed up with her relentless bullying, contacted the cops. When the cops arrived, they noticed Rose throwing water at one of the children and screamed at her to flee for her life. Rose was immediately detained for allegedly harassing minors. My parents objected, but the police chastised them as well for failing to keep Rose under control. While this news has stunned some members of the family, it does not surprise me at all. I'd witnessed her unrestrained conduct for years, knowing full well that my parents were more interested in creating excuses for her than holding her accountable. Nonetheless, the fact that my sister was now in legal jeopardy was a stark reminder of how disturbing her behavior had become. My parents ended up bailing her out, but Rose is now facing a court date. This week, I received a call from my parents that caught me off guard. After 6 years of silence, seeing their phone number on my phone seemed weird. My father told me that he and my mother were at their wits' end dealing with my sister. He claimed they wanted to reconcile with me, that they had missed me for years but had been too furious and stubborn about my decision to leave for college to contact me. It seemed as if he was attempting to rewrite the story, wiping away years of pain and abandonment with a half-hearted apology. I could tell he and Mom had called me for something, so I told them to spit it out. That's when Dad indicated that, with my sister's approaching court appearance, they were finally seeing the truth. That perhaps I had been correct all along about my sister. My father admitted, hesitantly, that my sister was a bully. He claimed that she had gotten worse over the years since I had left and was getting into more serious trouble. Dad informed me how he and Mom had talked and that he now felt sorry for what I had been through. He admitted that they should have listened to me more. He also informed me that they were finally willing to send Rose to therapy so she could receive the assistance she clearly required. Hearing those comments from Dad felt bizarre, especially since I had spent so much of my life urging him and Mom to take action against my sister, only to be dismissed or taught to accept Rose's actions. Dad went on, saying they wanted to meet with me and apologize in person if I was willing to listen. That's when I informed my dad, as quietly as I could, That while I was relieved that they were finally providing my sister with the assistance she required, the truth was that I no longer cared. They had been ignoring me for far too long. Over time, I accepted their absence and constructed a life without them. I wasn't willing to reconcile with them just now. My father then tried to get me to reconsider. Am I an asshole, AITA, if I don't reconcile with my family, especially given how they've treated me for years? Update 1. I want to clarify a few points because I can't respond to everyone in the comments. No, my sister was never bullied. She attended a special school developed for children with similar disabilities, and it was a tiny, closely regulated environment. The school only accepted a small number of special needs kids, who were closely monitored during the day. Her instructors were wonderful and provided good care for her, and my parents were constantly active in her life, checking in on her on a daily basis. There's no way my sister was bullied at school and took out her frustration on me. The truth is that her troubles were never caused by outside influences. They were caused by how she was allowed to behave at home. My parents tolerated her frequent mistreatment of me. If she bit me, slapped me, or shoved me, she would face no consequences. Meanwhile, I was always expected to console Rose or be more sympathetic of her actions. As for why Rose was never sent to therapy, the simple reality is that it has always been too expensive for my parents to consider. Furthermore, my mother has always maintained a possessive attitude about Rose. She never let her spend much time with anyone else since she believed that only she knew Rose's needs. As a result, Rose is too reliant on my mother, who makes all decisions for her. Now that I've read through all of the comments on my post, I understand why my parents are reaching out after all this time. The explanation is obvious. They most likely require my assistance with my sister's future case. I believe they may want me to provide a character reference for her if that is necessary, or they may be hoping I can help with the lawyer bills because I make a good living and they are aware of this. After all these years, it cannot simply be about reuniting. It appears to be a desperate attempt to rectify things, especially given Rose's legal troubles. They need someone to back her up, and I assume they believe I am that person. I am sure they want me to step in and be the good son who helps them clean up their mess, but I am not going to do it. Update 2. For those wondering how my grandparents feel about my parents trying to reconnect with me, they're not delighted. They haven't communicated much to my parents throughout the years, especially since I was kicked out and wanted to go to college. Since then, their relationship has been rocky, and they have generally maintained their distance. My grandparents have only maintained in contact with my parents because they occasionally help out with Rose, whether it's babysitting or caring for her when my parents need it. My grandparents understand exactly what Rose is like. They've witnessed her conduct personally, including her bullying, and are dissatisfied in how my parents have handled everything over the years. They've always been supportive of me, but they've never dismissed Rose's acts. So, with my parents now wishing to make amends and reconnect with me, my grandparents have made it obvious that they understand my reluctance. They have asked me to be cautious. They understand how devastated I have been as a result of my parents' actions, and they do not want me to rush into anything that could wind up being much more traumatic. My folks have also continued to message me all week. They strongly urge me to consider giving them another shot. They keep saying how much they regret the way things have been between us and how they've recognized they made mistakes. As a result, I'm torn. Update 3. My concerns regarding my parents were correct. Today, after weeks of asking, I finally consented to a video conversation with them. It had been a long time since we'd seen each other, and I was feeling a range of emotions building up to the call. When I finally saw them on TV, I couldn't help but note how different they appeared. They were considerably older than I remembered, tired and worn out. It crushed my heart to see them like that. Despite the emotions churning inside me, I attempted to remain calm. We chatted about their lives, how things had gone for them, and I told them a little bit about my business. We talked about my grandparents and caught up on family news. Our talk seemed nearly regular, as if no time had gone since I last saw them. My parents apologized to me again. They appeared almost desperate in their statements, inviting me to come see them and stating that they had been thinking about me. But at that point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I questioned them outright. Why now? After all, if they genuinely missed me, wouldn't they have contacted me sooner? During college, while I was gone and needed their help, they made no effort to stay in touch. So, what changed now? Why were they so ready to reconcile after so much time apart? That's when my parents, almost unwillingly, began to divulge the real reason they had contacted me. They claimed that they were in severe need of financial assistance to care for my sister, Rose. My father told me that they had depleted practically all of their savings over the years due to Rose's ongoing medical procedures. The bills had exhausted them, and now, With her court case waiting and the possibility of requiring therapy for her behavioral disorders, the financial strain was becoming insurmountable. My father finally begged me, almost pleadingly, if I could start sending them money every month because I was doing so well in life. My mother soon stepped in, emphasizing that the money would only be used for Rose and nothing else. I shook my head in answer, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I implored them, my voice quivering with rage. Do you really think I would just send you my hard-earned money to spend on Rose? I was straining to contain my rage. No matter how much you need it, how could I possibly assist you with her? She was the one who bullied me for years. She's the one that made my life miserable. She's the one who destroyed every birthday party I've ever had. My voice cracked as I continued. She is the one who has never shown any sympathy or concern for me. So, why should I aid her now? My history with Rose was so unpleasant, and now they expected me to jump in and be the financial rescuer for someone who had treated me so badly. It didn't make sense, and I couldn't let go of years of pain. I did not stop there, however. All of my frustration and years of bottled-up resentment came spilling out. I pointed out to my parents that they had never kept me safe from Rose. They'd never given me genuine compassion when it came to her. Instead, they simply expected me to follow suit, to buy into their story, and to care for her as if everything she did was something I had to accept. I was a youngster, and I needed their protection, but they had let me down several times. I explained that just because Rose has ADHD does not mean she should not be held accountable for her conduct now that she is an adult. I blamed my parents and made it plain that if they had given her proper care when she was younger, things could have turned out differently now. Perhaps she would have grown into a better person, capable of realizing the pain she causes others. But they didn't. They had let her get away with so much that she was eventually jailed for pestering young children. Even after this, they kept urging me to intervene and assist her, as if I weren't her first victim. My parents attempted to argue back, but I informed them that, while I appreciated their apologies, it did not mean I would simply forgive and forget everything that had happened. My parents backed down after hearing this. They told me that regardless of whether I could help them financially, they wanted to keep working on our relationship. Mom informed me that she and Dad regretted they had made other decisions back then, but because they couldn't erase the past, they wanted to be there for me in whatever way they could going forward. On the one hand, I applauded their eagerness to move forward, but on the other, I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of all the sorrow I'd been carrying for so long. I asked for some time to think. Update 4. I apologize for the month-long gap between updates. My sister has been compelled to attend court-mandated counseling, which I believe is a step in the right way. My parents also had to pay a significant fine as a result of Rose's harassment of those children. I honestly expected my sister's punishment would be harsher, but I guess the judge was lenient because this was Rose's first formal crime. In addition, some of the children's parents have filed a restraining order against my sister. Rose is now legally compelled to stay far away from their children. If she breaks the order, she will be arrested. Now, back to my parents. Since that conversation in which I declined to grant them any financial assistance, they have not mentioned it again. We have continued to chat, but only about minor details. I guess they meant what they said and are just trying to rebuild their relationship with me. Although I am glad to be back in their life, I am not ready to resume a full connection with my family, especially with Rose. I don't think I'll ever forgive her, no matter how much time passes. The things she did to me, bullying me, making my life miserable for so many years, cannot simply be wiped. I hope that through counseling, she will finally learn to hold herself accountable for her acts. To be honest, I have no idea how long it will take, or if it will ever happen.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.